It started with a dull cramp just under my ribs. I figured it was gas, maybe the leftover tacos from the night before coming back to haunt me. But within an hour, I was doubled over in my office, sweating through my dress shirt, gripping the edge of my desk like it was the only thing keeping me upright. My assistant, Denise, took one look at me, eyes wide and scared, and called 911 before I could protest. The paramedics arrived just as I sank to the floor, curled around the pain that now stabbed like a blade with every breath. The back of the ambulance was cold, sterile, bright. They asked me questions I could barely answer through clenched teeth. My vitals weren't good, a heart rate up, blood pressure crashing. One of them muttered something about a ruptured appendix. "We need to get him into surgery fast," I heard someone say. That's when I reached for my phone. Through the haze, I dialed Talia. My wife. My partner. My person. She picked up on the third ring, the noise in the background immediately giving away her location, glasses clinking, laughter, a familiar song from one of her wedding playlists. "Hello," she said, her voice light, almost annoyed. "Talia," I managed. "I'm in an ambulance. They think it's my appendix. I'm on the way to surgery." There was a pause. Not a gasp. Not a scramble to ask which hospital. Just a pause. Then she said, "I'm at Cassie's wedding." Another pause, then a sigh. "Can we talk later?" I waited, thinking maybe I'd misheard her. That she'd follow it with a frantic, "Where are you?" "I'm coming now." But there was nothing. Just the soft hum of her breathing and the echo of a party on the other end of the line. Then a click. The call ended. I looked at the phone like it might explain what had just happened. Like maybe I'd called the wrong number, or maybe she hadn't heard me right. But no. She hung up. She hung up. I was wheeled into the ER, my phone slipping from my fingers. A nurse took it, tucked it into a plastic bag with my wallet and keys. "We're going to take good care of you," she said. Her kindness felt like a warm towel over my chest. Not because it was extraordinary, just because it wasn't indifference. The pain got worse, like someone was twisting me from the inside. They gave me something in and for that blurred the edges of everything. A surgeon came by, explained the risks, said they had to go in immediately. "You'll be under before you know it." I asked if I could see my wife. They shook their heads gently. "No one's here yet." I nodded, not because I accepted it, but because I couldn't argue. I was too tired, too drugged, too hollowed out by the growing realization that she wasn't coming. The last thing I saw before the lights dimmed was the nurse squeezing my hand and telling me to count backwards from 10. I tried, made it to 7, maybe 6. And when I woke up, alone in the recovery room, it wasn't the pain in my side that tore at me the most, it was the silence. The absence of footsteps rushing in. No soft voice saying my name. No fingers brushing the hair from my forehead. Just the beep of a heart monitor, and the sterile ceiling tiles that looked exactly the same as they had when I went under. A nurse came in, smiled warmly. "Surgery went well. We got it in time. You're very lucky." I nodded again. I was alive. Apparently that counted for something. "Anyone coming to visit?" she asked gently. "My daughter, maybe," I said. "She's only 7. The word stuck in my throat. I couldn't say wife. Not right then. Not yet. They moved me to a regular room. I stared at the door every time I heard footsteps in the hallway, expecting her to appear. Expecting anything. Even a text. But my phone stayed dark. And when I finally asked to see it, there was only one new message from my neighbor Clarice. "Bria's with me. Heard what happened. I'll bring her after school. Hang in there." I lay back on the stiff hospital bed, one hand pressed against the bandage on my side, the other gripping the phone like it was a lifeline. But the only one reaching for me was a child. My child. The one with tiny hands and a bigger heart than either of her parents deserved. The morphine dulled the ache in my gut, but nothing could numb the sting in my chest. I kept replaying the moment in the ambulance. Her voice, so breezy, so detached. Like I'd interrupted a grocery list. Like I wasn't lying in the back of a speeding emergency vehicle, minutes away from being sliced open. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't even ask which hospital. And maybe that told me everything I hadn't wanted to admit for months now. Maybe the surgery hadn't just removed a failing organ. It had revealed a failing marriage. One that had been rupturing long before my appendix did. The truth hit hard. I could have died, and she wouldn't have known until the music stopped and the lights came back on at that damn wedding. And worst of all, I believed her when she said, "Can we talk later?" Because somewhere deep inside, I was still holding space for a woman who had already let go of me. But not Bria. Bria was coming. And somehow, that was enough to keep breathing. The room was gray, and not just in color. It was the kind of gray that soaked into your skin, numbed your thoughts, and blurred the sense of time. The post-op haze clung to me like a damp towel. Somewhere nearby, monitors beeped steadily, rhythmic and different. My throat burned from the breathing tube they'd used during surgery, and every inch of my body felt foreign, like it had been taken apart and sewn back together. I blinked slowly, piecing the world together one sterile surface at a time. Then I felt it, small fingers wrapped around my hand. I turned my head, sluggish and heavy, and saw her. Bria, my daughter. 7 years old and already so much more than I deserved. She sat perched on the edge of the hospital bed like she belonged there. Her legs swung gently, brushing against the railing with each motion. Her dark curls were pulled into a messy ponytail, and she wore her favorite rainbow hoodie, the one with the unicorn patch peeling off at the corner. She didn't say anything at first, just held my hand like she'd been doing it the entire time. "Hi, Daddy," she said softly. The sound of her voice hit me harder than the anesthesia ever could. "Bria," I whispered, my throat hoarse. "You're here." She nodded. "Clarice picked me up from school. She said you got hurt." Clarice. My neighbor. The woman who had always offered to help with Bria whenever Talia got too busy. I owed her 100 thank yous. 1,000. Because when I was laid out, sliced open and sedated, it wasn't my wife who showed up. It was my daughter. Delivered by someone who actually gave a damn. "I'm okay," I lied, squeezing Bria's hand weakly. "Just a little sore." She looked at me like she didn't believe a word of it, but she didn't challenge me. "Not yet. I brought Henry," she said, lifting her small backpack onto the bed. She reached inside and pulled out a faded green stuffed turtle, his seams loose, one eye missing. "He keeps secrets," she added, placing Henry gently beside my arm. I chuckled despite the pain that shot through my abdomen. "Thanks, sweetheart. I think I could use a few secrets." Bria swung her legs a bit faster, her eyes studying me with a mix of curiosity and worry that no 7-year-old should ever have to carry. She leaned in close, lowering her voice like we were the only two people in the world. "Why didn't Mommy come?" The question hit harder than the scalpel had. I hesitated. What do you say to a child when the truth would bruise something tender inside her? When the person she trusted most had chosen glitter and champagne over a hospital gurney? "She was at a wedding," I said slowly, measuring every syllable. I think she didn't realize how serious it was. Bria didn't nod, didn't blink. She just stared at me with those wide eyes that had always felt like little mirrors. Then, in a tone that was oddly calm for someone her age, she said, "That's not okay." I didn't know what to say to that. I wanted to defend Talia, to make excuses, but I couldn't find any that made sense, not to her, not to me. Bria reached out and placed her hand over mine again. "I'll stay," she whispered. And she did. For hours, she stayed perched beside me, humming to herself, coloring in her notebook, occasionally checking my monitor as if the beeping meant something she could fix. The nurses adored her. One brought her an extra pudding cup. Another let her borrow a stethoscope. Clarice eventually returned with snacks and a warm blanket for Bria, and I could see the worry etched into her face when she looked at me. "She's strong," Clarice whispered when Bria stepped out to use the restroom. "She wouldn't leave you if you asked her to." I nodded slowly. "I know." As the afternoon faded into evening, I drifted in and out of sleep, lulled by morphine and Bria's soft, constant presence. She didn't cry. Not once. She just existed beside me like an anchor. When the world felt unsteady, she kept it from tilting too far. At one point, I woke to find her asleep at the foot of the bed, Henry tucked under her chin, her notebook clutched to her chest. I reached for it gently, flipping through the pages. There were drawings, bright, bold strokes of color. One of the pictures was of a hospital bed, a little girl sitting beside it, holding the hand of a man with a tube in his side. Underneath it, she'd written, "This is how I helped." I closed the notebook slowly, a lump forming in my throat. She had helped. More than she would ever understand. The door opened quietly a little while later. A nurse stepped in, checked my vitals, and smiled down at Bria. "She's been amazing," she whispered. "Most kids get scared in hospitals. She's been like a little guardian." I nodded again, words still caught in my throat. That night, after Clarice convinced Bria to go home and get some rest, the room felt cavernous without her. The silence was louder, emptier. Talia still hadn't called, still hadn't texted. I was alone again in every sense that mattered. I stared at the ceiling, fingers twitching where Bria had held them for so long. The painkillers dulled the physical ache, but the emotional one simmered just beneath the surface, like embers waiting to ignite. I didn't cry. I wanted to, but something about the way Bria had sat beside me, unflinching and faithful, made me hold it together just a little longer. Because she hadn't fallen apart, and if my daughter could sit in this cold, sterile room without breaking, so could I. Before I fell asleep, I whispered into the quiet, hoping the walls would keep the secret too. Thank you, Bria. Thank you for showing up. She was just 7, but in that moment, she was everything. I woke to the sound of stilettos tapping down the hall. There was a rhythm to it, too deliberate to be a nurse. The door creaked open, and in walked Talia, still dressed like the party hadn't ended. Her curls were intact, cascading down her shoulders in ringlets too perfect for morning. Makeup clung to her face, lipstick slightly faded but visible, foundation layered like armor. She wore the lavender dress I'd seen hanging in our closet for weeks, the one she said she wasn't even sure she wanted to wear. Apparently, she did. Hey, she said softly, walking toward the bed like it was unfamiliar territory. You look better than I thought. I blinked up at her, too drained to measure the weight of her words. My throat was dry, and the ache in my side pulsed with each breath. I tried to sit up straighter, wincing at the pain. No, don't, she said, reaching out halfway like she might help, then stopping short. Her hand hovered for a second, then fell to her side. Sorry I couldn't be here last night. Cassie's wedding ran long. Long. That was how she described it. As if time was the only reason she didn't show. Not choice. Not detachment. Just a schedule that got away from her. I looked at her and saw a stranger wrapped in silk and sprayed in rose perfume. A woman who kissed my cheek with lips that didn't linger, like her presence alone was the gift. She pulled back quickly, brushing non-existent lint from her purse. How are you feeling? She asked, not meeting my eyes. I had a drain tube in me last night, I said flatly. Still do. She nodded like I'd told her the weather. Well, I'm here now. She glanced around the room, mildly annoyed by the clutter of used tissues, empty water cups, and the faint antiseptic scent that clung to everything. Room's kind of depressing, she added. It was a hospital. It wasn't meant to be a honeymoon suite. I didn't respond. I just watched her as she finally sat down, crossing her legs at the knee, her dress riding up slightly but never losing its poise. Her phone chimed. She smiled as she pulled it from her purse. Cassie and Trey landed in Cabo, she said, scrolling. Oh, actually, they ran into an issue at the resort. Had to upgrade last minute. $2,000 more than expected. Can you believe that? I stared at her, blinking slowly. She looked up, as if my silence was an invitation. I know we already gave them the espresso machine, but do you think we could help? Just to get them settled, you know? I didn't even realize I was gripping the bed rail until my knuckles turned white. $2,000, I repeated, the words flat and hollow. You're asking me to pay for someone else's honeymoon, from a hospital bed. She tilted her head slightly, like she was confused why I would find this offensive. It's not a big deal. You've helped them before. And it's not like we're strapped. We? Talia, I was in emergency surgery last night. Alone. No one came. Not you. Not anyone. I could have died on that table, and the first time you'd know would have been if they called you after. She didn't flinch. She just pressed her lips together and looked away for a second. You always do this, she said, her voice laced with a defensive edge. Make everything about how I disappoint you. I was at a wedding. I didn't know it was that serious. You didn't ask. That stopped her. Not because it wasn't true, but because it was. She looked at her phone again, more to avoid my eyes than to check anything urgent. A long pause stretched between us, the kind of silence that grew heavier the longer it sat. Then, without shame, she said, well, can we talk about Cassie's thing later? They're stressed, and I don't want to leave them hanging. I let out a laugh that wasn't really a laugh. It was breath and disbelief. I haven't eaten solid food. I have stitches in my side. And you want me to wire money to Cabo? It's not about the money, she snapped. It's about being there for people you love. There it was. The line she didn't realize should have shattered her argument instead of strengthening it. I stared at her, long and hard. I was here last night, Talia. Cut open. Bleeding. Drugged out of my mind. And you didn't come. So maybe don't lecture me on being there for the people you love. The words landed. I saw them hit her. Saw the slight twitch of her mouth. The narrowing of her eyes. But she didn't apologize. She didn't even look ashamed. Just inconvenienced. She stood up abruptly, smoothing out the front of her dress. I'll come back later. Maybe bring you some real food if they let you eat. And then she walked out. Just like that. Like it was any other visit. Like she hadn't just confirmed every quiet suspicion I'd been trying to suppress for the past year. I stared at the closed door for a long time, the beeping of the monitor returning as the only sound in the room. It wasn't the pain in my body that had hollowed me out. It was the truth echoing in her footsteps as she walked away. She was gone before Bria arrived again, this time with a coloring book and a chocolate milk. She climbed into the chair next to me, giving Henry the turtle a quick pat on the head before settling in. Mommy said she had to help Cassie, she murmured, like she already knew it wouldn't sit well with me. I nodded slowly. That's what she said. Bria looked at me for a long time. Then she reached into her backpack, pulling out her drawing notebook. She flipped to a blank page and began to write. What are you doing? I asked. She didn't look up. I'm writing Mom a letter. I didn't ask what it would say. I was too tired, too raw. And somewhere deep inside, I knew Bria would say everything I couldn't. The only thing I could do was reach for her hand and hold it tight. Because the only person who showed up without being asked was a little girl with a turtle and a voice bigger than the both of us. And right then, that was more than enough. The hours slipped past like syrup, slow, sticky, and impossible to ignore. I stayed mostly quiet that day, half awake and sore, the kind of sore that wasn't just from surgery but from something deeper, more permanent. My body was trying to heal, but my mind had already decided what it wouldn't forget. Talia sat in the corner of the hospital room, not beside me, not near the bed, but tucked into the vinyl armchair like a bored guest at someone else's event. Her legs were crossed, her phone cradled in both hands, her thumbs dancing across the screen. She hadn't asked how I slept. She hadn't asked if I needed anything. She hadn't even looked at the drain bag hanging from my side, half full of something that looked like watered-down cranberry juice. Instead, she was smiling at photos. Look at this one, she said out loud to herself. Cassie's dress in that light, gorgeous. She turned the phone toward me briefly, but I didn't react, didn't lift my head, didn't offer a sound. The disconnect between her joy and my reality was so vast, it wasn't even worth naming anymore. Bria sat by my side again, her presence a bomb. She brought her sketchbook, the thick, spiral-bound one she insisted on carrying everywhere. Crayon bits were smudged along the cover, and the corners were dog-eared from love, not neglect. She wasn't coloring today, though. She was quiet, observant, watching the space around her like she was trying to figure out where she fit in the strange adult world of beeping machines, distant parents, and whispered tension. Daddy, she said softly, nudging my arm. Can I see your chart? I looked down at her, confused. Why? She shrugged like the question didn't really need an answer. I just want to know what happened. I didn't ask further. I didn't need to. Bria had always been a little different, intuitive, thoughtful beyond her age. The kind of child who could sense mood changes before the temperature in the room shifted. I motioned to the clipboard resting in the wall bracket. You can take it. Just be careful. She climbed off the chair, her little sneakers padding softly on the tile. Talia didn't even look up from her phone as Bria retrieved the discharge note tucked behind the daily chart. She studied it like it was a treasure map, her brow furrowed. Then, wordlessly, she slipped it into the back pocket of her sketchbook and zipped it shut. What are you planning? I asked, more amused than alarmed. She glanced at me with a small smile. I'm not sure yet, but I think Mom needs to read it. I should have stopped her. I should have said something. But I didn't, because for the first time in 2 days, I felt seen, felt like someone in that room understood what had happened to me. It wasn't just my appendix that ruptured. Something else did too. Something between me and the woman scrolling through Santorini spa packages 5 feet A. Later that night, the room quieted. The nurses made their rounds. The lights dimmed to a gentle yellow that buzzed softly in the corners. Talia was still in the chair, her eyes now scanning Instagram reels, laughing quietly to herself every now and then. I wasn't sure what hurt more, her distance or her ease. Bria sat cross-legged on the floor with her sketchbook open again. But she wasn't drawing. She was writing. Her glitter pen moved slowly, deliberately. The tip scraped softly against the thick paper, her tongue poking out between her lips in concentration. She flipped back and forth a few times, then settled on a clean page. I watched, curious but too tired to ask. When she finished, she carefully folded the page in half, then again, and tucked the paper, along with the discharge note, into a blank white envelope she'd pulled from her backpack. "Where did you get that?" I asked. "Clarice," she said. "I told her I wanted to write a letter." I nodded slowly, swallowing past the dry lump in my throat. "Did you write it for me?" She shook her head. "For Mom." That answer landed like a stone skipping across still water. I didn't know what Bria had written, and I didn't ask. Some part of me trusted her to say what I couldn't, what I'd long stopped trying to. She closed the envelope carefully and looked at me, her eyes clear. "Can I leave it on her pillow when we get home?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Yes," I said. "She needs to know." Bria crawled up into the chair beside me and leaned her head on my shoulder. I winced slightly at the pressure, but didn't move. I couldn't. I didn't want to. "Do you think she'll be mad?" she asked after a while. I looked across the room at Talia, still glued to her screen, still lost in a world I no longer lived in, and then down at the envelope in Bria's lap. "She might be," I said honestly. "But sometimes people need to hear the truth, even when it's uncomfortable." Bria nodded slowly, as if she already knew that, as if she'd known it far longer than a 7-year-old should. The nurse came in a bit later, checking my IV and updating the chart. Bria yawned and rested her head against the side of the bed. I reached over and brushed a curl from her forehead. "Go to sleep, baby," I whispered. She nodded, clutching Henry the turtle to her chest. Across the room, Talia looked up just once. She saw us, me and Bria, huddled in silence, and for a brief second, her face twisted into something unreadable. But she didn't say anything. She didn't ask about the envelope Bria now held under her palm. She just returned to her scrolling, pausing only to like a photo of Cassie and Trey toasting in the glow of a candlelit dinner. That night, the monitors kept beeping. My side throbbed. But none of it hurt as much as knowing the most important moment of the day didn't even register for my wife. My daughter wrote a letter. And I hoped it would be loud enough to be heard over 1,000 missed moments. We returned home 3 days later, though the word home no longer felt accurate. It was just a structure now, walls and beams and hollow spaces where intimacy used to live. I walked slower than usual, hunched forward like a question mark, my body still learning how to move without screaming. The incision in my side burned with each step, every breath stretching the line of stitches, but I said nothing. What was the point? Talia barely spoke during the drive. Her fingers tapped constantly against her phone screen, the soft clicks syncing with the car's turn signals like a metronome for her apathy. She didn't ask if I was hungry. Didn't ask if I needed help into the house. When we pulled into the driveway, she simply got out, heels clacking against the pavement as she carried her purse and went inside ahead of me. Bria stayed close, one hand on my elbow, her tiny frame acting like a pillar I shouldn't have needed but did. Inside, the air smelled like lemon cleaner and silence. Talia had arranged for a cleaner to freshen up the place before we came home. She said it was so I wouldn't have to worry about mess when I returned. But it didn't feel like a gesture of care. It felt like staging. Like the house had been prepped for appearances, not recovery. I sank slowly into the couch, biting my lip against the ache as I eased down. Bria ran to get my blanket, the one with the navy and gold checkers she always insisted made me look like a superhero. She draped it over my legs, and then scampered off to the kitchen without a word. The sound of drawers opening and the soft scrape of a chair being dragged caught my attention. I turned my head slowly and saw her at the kitchen table, glitter pen in hand, notebook open again. She sat with a quiet focus, her tongue tucked at the corner of her mouth, just like she did when she was trying to get her unicorn drawing symmetrical. She was writing again. This wasn't the playful kind of writing. No hearts, no stars, no doodles in the margins. Just neat lines and her small hand pressing firmly, like every word had to land with the right amount of weight. She folded the paper, opened a fresh envelope, and slid the note inside. Then she reached into her sketchbook and took out the hospital discharge summary she'd tucked away days earlier. She placed it gently in the envelope behind the letter and sealed it shut. She stared at the envelope for a moment, then stood and walked down the hallway with quiet purpose. I watched her pass, watched her pause just outside our bedroom. She looked back at me once, not for permission, but for reassurance. I gave her a small nod, the only strength I could manage. She turned the doorknob slowly, tiptoed inside, and a few seconds later, she re-emerged empty-handed. Talia came downstairs a moment later, dressed for work. She was already wearing heels, makeup fresh again, phone tucked in her palm like a lifeline. "I've got meetings this morning," she said, not looking at me. "Did you take your meds yet?" "I did," I replied. My voice cracked a little. I hadn't spoken much since we got home. Maybe I didn't trust it to carry all I was holding in. She glanced at me, her eyes skimming the blanket, the way I was sitting slightly lopsided, the swelling around my waist. But she didn't ask how I felt. Not really. Her eyes flicked toward Bria, who was now sitting on the floor with her turtle Henry, brushing its plush head with the care of a child nursing something hurt and precious. Talia walked into the kitchen, heels clicking against the hardwood. "We're low on almond milk," she said, as if that were somehow more urgent than the incision tearing through my side. Then she added, "Remind me to grab a gift for Trey's mom. Her birthday's next week." I didn't reply. I wasn't being petty. I just didn't have the emotional energy to stretch towards someone who never once stepped toward me. 10 minutes later, the front door shut behind her. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was proof. Proof that everything I'd felt in that hospital room was not imagined. The distance was real. And now that I was home, I could see it even more clearly. Our lives weren't intertwined anymore. They were simply overlapping out of habit. Bria climbed into the chair beside me and rested her head on my shoulder. "She'll find it," she whispered. "She will," I replied, resting my hand on top of hers. "She'll probably be mad," she added, looking up at me. "Maybe. Will she say anything?" "I don't know." That was the truth. I had no idea what Talia would do with the envelope. Whether she'd read it at all, whether she'd care. But I did know one thing: someone had to say something. And Bria had done it. At 7 years old, she'd had the courage neither of us did. Later that evening, I heard footsteps upstairs. Then stillness. Long, thick stillness. I imagined her walking into the room, seeing the envelope on her pillow. I imagined her picking it up, maybe recognizing the handwriting, maybe thinking it was a drawing or a note from Bria asking for another trip to the zoo. I wondered what her face looked like when she realized it was something else, something heavier. I didn't go upstairs. I stayed on the couch while the television murmured on low volume. Bria sat beside me, curled up under my arm with Henry squeezed tight against her chest. She didn't ask to watch cartoons. She didn't ask for snacks. She just stayed close. Like I was the patient and she was the caretaker. And maybe that was true. When Talia finally came down, her steps were slower than usual. Her hands were empty. No phone. No purse. She didn't say anything. Just walked past us, paused in the doorway to the kitchen, then turned and went right back upstairs. I didn't follow her. Bria lifted her head. "Do you think she read it?" "I think she did. She didn't say anything." "She doesn't know how to," I said softly. Bria nodded like she understood something deep and painful and adult. "She has to feel it first." And maybe that was the most profound thing I'd heard in weeks. The envelope had been delivered. Now we waited to see if the words inside could do what silence never could. I didn't hear her open the envelope, but I knew the exact moment she found it. The house had fallen into its quiet nighttime rhythm, dishwasher humming low in the kitchen, the distant creak of wood settling into the walls. Bria had already gone to bed, tucked in with Henry under one arm and the corner of her blanket curled in the other. I was in the guest room, not because anyone said I had to be, but because the idea of sleeping beside Talia after everything felt like inviting a stranger into my grief. I lay there in the dim light, staring up at the ceiling, trying not to think too hard, trying not to imagine the crumple of paper or the sharp inhale she might have made when she recognized her daughter's handwriting. But then I heard it, the soft tread of her footsteps down the hall. They stopped just outside our bedroom door. The floorboards groaned, then silence. A long silence. And then a sigh, like something cracked inside her chest. I didn't move. She didn't either. Eventually, the door creaked open and then gently closed. Another few seconds passed before I heard the mattress creak and settle under her weight. Then stillness again. I could picture her. Sitting on the edge of the bed in that pale light, envelope in hand, the doctor's discharge note folded inside with Bria's words scrawled in glitter pen, tiny, unfiltered, and devastating. I'd never read the letter. Still hadn't asked. But I didn't need to. Bria had seen everything. Heard enough. Felt too much. And in her own way, she'd become the witness I didn't know I needed. I sat up slowly, the incision pulling like a stitch caught on fabric. I shuffled to the hallway, leaning against the door frame to catch my breath. The house was dark, but from under the crack in our bedroom door, I saw a line of light, still and faint. Then it happened. The sound of paper rustling, a breath catching in a throat. And then, barely audible, the faintest shiver in the air. I could hear it because I wasn't just listening with my ears. I was listening with everything in me. I knew that sound. Her hands were shaking. For the first time in what felt like forever, the silence wasn't mine, it was hers. The weight of that reversal was nearly enough to drop me to the floor. I didn't knock. I didn't speak. I backed away from the door, back into the guest room, and sat on the edge of the bed, stunned by the reality of it. She was finally seeing it. Not just the paper. Not just Bria's words. She was seeing me. All those nights she rolled away instead of asking how work was. All those dinners where I carried the conversation like luggage only I packed. All the birthdays, anniversaries, long silences dressed up as peace. The overlooked efforts. The forgotten kindnesses. The apologies I'd never been owed but gave anyway. Now, in that room, with Bria's tiny handwriting spelling out everything I'd left unspoken, Talia was facing the one thing she couldn't ignore: reflection. Not accusation. Not revenge. Reflection. An hour passed before I heard her move again. She padded into the hallway barefoot, more slowly than usual. Her pace was tentative, hesitant. She paused outside the guest room, and I held my breath, unsure if she'd knock or keep walking. The door creaked slightly, and then she pushed it open with a hand that still trembled. Her face was pale, washed out under the hallway light. Her eyes looked softer, but guarded, too. She didn't say my name. Just stood there, the envelope in one hand, the folded note in the other. I read it, she said, her voice small. I nodded. She stepped in slowly, as if the room might collapse beneath her. She wrote it herself. You didn't tell her to, right? No, I said. She looked down at the paper again, her eyes welling, not spilling, but holding something at the edge. She said she saw me smiling at pictures while you were in pain, Talia murmured. She said she was scared, not just for you, but for what it meant that I didn't care. I didn't answer. Not because I couldn't, but because she needed space to say what she hadn't been able to. She said I didn't come when it mattered, she whispered. You didn't. The words hung there like smoke. Heavy, honest. Talia sank down into the chair in the corner, the one where she'd scrolled through wedding photos in the hospital room without so much as a glance at my face. Her fingers gripped the edge of the chair. I didn't think it was that serious, she said again, repeating the excuse like it might sound better the second time. You've always been strong. You always bounce back. I thought. You thought I could do it alone, I finished for her. And I did. But that wasn't the point. She pressed her lips together, then opened them again only to close them once more. Why didn't you say anything? She asked. Why didn't you scream or demand I come? Because I didn't want to ask to matter, I said quietly. I wanted to see if I did. The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was aching. It was the sound of bricks falling out of a wall she didn't realize she'd built. She looked at me, eyes rimmed with red. I'm sorry. I believed that she wanted to mean it. I even believed she meant it in the moment. But I'd learned that apologies weren't always repair. Sometimes they were just punctuation at the end of a long sentence no one had the courage to edit. I nodded, accepting what I could, leaving the rest untouched. She reached into her pocket and pulled out Bria's stuffed turtle. Henry. She left him on my pillow too, she said. Said he keeps secrets. He does, I said. But Bria? She doesn't. Talia managed a weak smile. No, she doesn't. For a long while, neither of us moved. We didn't rehash the hospital, or the wedding, or the way silence had replaced intimacy over time. We just sat in the gravity of a letter written in glitter ink that had said more than a marriage full of dinner conversations ever had. Eventually, Talia stood and walked back toward the door. She turned before she left, one hand resting on the frame. I don't know how to fix this, she admitted. I nodded slowly. I don't either. But in that moment, I knew something had shifted. Not healed. Not reversed. Just shifted. Because her hands had shaken. And that meant, for once, she'd felt it. The next morning arrived with the smell of burnt toast and scrambled silence. The house was unusually still, as if it too had read Bria's letter and didn't know how to respond. I lay in bed listening to the muffled sounds of movement. Talia in the kitchen, fumbling with pans like she wasn't sure what to do with her hands now that they weren't holding her phone. I rose slowly, my body stiff and sore, the incision pulling with each breath. I didn't call out or announce myself. I just moved down the hallway like a ghost revisiting a life he used to live. The kitchen was awash in morning light, too bright for the kind of quiet that filled it. Talia stood over the stove, her robe cinched too tightly, hair pulled back into a bun she used when she didn't want to be seen. She turned when she heard me, but didn't smile. "Scrambled eggs," she said softly. "And toast." I forgot the timer on the first batch. I looked at the pan. The eggs were too dry, the toast still smoking on a plate by the sink. She wasn't here to impress anyone. This wasn't a grand gesture. It was something else, an apology without a name. I nodded, taking a seat at the table. Bria sat across from me, dressed and ready for school, even though we hadn't yet spoken a word about it. Her backpack rested beside her chair, and her shoes were on the wrong feet, something she often did when she was too deep in her thoughts to notice. Talia set a plate in front of me. No garnish. No effort to dress it up. Just food, mechanical and sufficient. "How did you sleep?" she asked, still standing. I took a bite of toast and chewed slowly before answering. "Fine." She nodded, then moved to the counter and began wiping down a perfectly clean surface. "I was thinking of taking Bria to school today. You could rest." Bria looked at me for permission, like I was still the compass she trusted even when the maps got confusing. "That's fine," I said. Talia glanced over. "I mean, unless you'd rather I didn't." I didn't answer right away. "You should take her." Bria stood slowly, slinging her bag over one shoulder. She walked around the table and pressed a kiss to my temple. "Text me later," she whispered. "Always," I replied. She didn't kiss her mother. Just walked to the front door and waited. Talia followed a moment later, pausing with her hand on the knob. She looked back at me like she wanted to say something, like the apology was still somewhere between her throat and her lips. But it didn't come. Not yet. When the door shut behind them, the silence left behind was heavier than their presence had been. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at the uneaten eggs, the half-burnt toast, and the empty space where words should have been. Around noon, my phone buzzed. I picked it up expecting a message from Bria, maybe a doodle or a thinking of you note in emoji form. But it wasn't her. It was an email from Talia's cousin, Cassie. Subject: "Thank you so much. Hey, just wanted to say thanks again for the honeymoon contribution, Trey, and I were so surprised. We landed in Cabo and upgraded our suite because of you two. You didn't have to, but we're so grateful. Can't wait to show you photos when we get back." The breath I took in was sharp. Cold. There had been no gift. I hadn't authorized anything. I hadn't agreed to send money. Not after what had happened. Not after what she asked for in the hospital, as I lay there with tubes in my side and silence in my ears. I stared at the email for a long time, the words blurring into noise. Then I checked our account. There it was. A $2,000 transfer. Dated the same night I'd returned home. The weight of it sank low in my chest. This wasn't just selfishness. This was an oversight. This was theft of trust, of choice, of the very dignity I'd been trying to rebuild. I set the phone down carefully, like it was something fragile I didn't want to break even though it had just broken me again. Later that afternoon, Talia returned. She stepped inside with her work bag slung over her shoulder and the car keys still in hand. She looked surprised to see me still at the table, like she thought the day would erase the inn. "How was your day?" she asked. "Cassie emailed," I said. She froze mid-step. "She thanked us for the honeymoon contribution," I added. Her eyes dropped to the floor. "I didn't agree to that," I said quietly. "I know," she replied. "No excuses this time. Just the truth in its raw, unadorned form." "I didn't say yes, Talia." "I know," she whispered again, barely audible. "Then why?" She hesitated. "Because they asked. Because I didn't want to say no. Because it felt easier to ask for forgiveness than permission." "You didn't even ask for forgiveness." She finally looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed again, but this time there were no tears waiting behind them, just exhaustion. "I don't know how to fix what I've done." I nodded. "You don't. But that doesn't mean I'll keep pretending it's not broken." She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. So I stood, every movement deliberate, and walked past her toward the guest room. I didn't slam the door. I didn't yell. I just closed it. That night, I lay in bed with my back to the door, staring at the wall until sleep finally came. And in that stillness, I realized something simple but final. There were no apologies. not real ones. Only a hollow routine dressed up as love. And I'd finally stopped listening for sorry. A week passed like fog, clinging to everything, softening the edges, but not enough to hide the bruises underneath. I moved slower, not just because of the pain in my side, but because I was still dragging the weight of things unspoken. Talia and I exchanged words, sure, but they were functional, past the salt, as Bria dressed, the car needs gas kinds of words. None of them filled the silence between us. They just camouflaged it. Then came the brunch invite. Talia's Aunt Lydia was hosting one of her infamous family gatherings, complete with champagne flutes, matching linen napkins, and surface-level smiles. Talia said we should go. Everyone will be there, she'd insisted, her tone teetering on obligation and desperation. It'll be good to show up. Show up for who? I asked. She didn't answer. I didn't want to go. The idea of sitting through stories of wedding cakes and honeymoon packages made my chest tighten, but Bria heard us talking. She looked up from her cereal with a quiet kind of hope. Will Grandma be there? She asked. And Aunt Lydia's dog? I nodded slowly. Yeah, baby. They'll be there. Then can we go? Just for a little, she asked, her eyes shining the way they used to when she believed the world was fair and kind. So I said yes. Not for Talia. For Bria. We arrived to a house filled with curated warmth, scented candles, pristine white furniture, and soft jazz humming through invisible speakers. People greeted us at the door with their kisses and tilted glances. Talia's hand brushed mine once in the driveway, like she was testing if I'd be the husband she could parade again. I kept my hands in my pockets. Inside, Lydia welcomed us with the performative joy of a talk show host. Darling, you're glowing. Oh, and look at you, she added to me, her voice dipping into polite surprise. You made it. I'm not dead, I replied, maybe a little too flat. She blinked, then chuckled, brushing it off with a pat on my arm. You always were the dry one. Bria darted toward the backyard, chasing after the corgi with her usual giggle, the sound of it briefly restoring some brightness to the day. We moved to the dining room, where the table was already set, placed cards, polished silverware, miniature name tags tied with ribbon. Talia sat near the center, next to Cassie and her new husband Trey, who looked like he still hadn't unpacked from Cabo. I was placed at the far end, between Lydia's husband and a cousin I hadn't seen in years, someone who once asked me what my name was at our wedding. I eased into the chair carefully, the incision under my shirt reminding me of the wound I still carried. I glanced around the table as the brunch began. Platters passed hands. Stories were swapped. No one mentioned the hospital. No one asked how I was doing. Not a single person looked me in the eye for longer than a second. Cassie beamed as she told the table about the honeymoon. It was magical. The room upgrade was perfect. The champagne, the view. Trey surprised me with a spa day. I felt like a queen. Talia clapped lightly, her voice sweet. You deserved it, Cass. You two worked so hard to make that wedding amazing. I watched the words float between them like currency, exchanged easily, carelessly. And we never got a proper chance to say thank you. Cassie added, turning toward me. That money saved us. You're such a generous guy. I looked at her for a long second, then took a sip of water instead of answering. Someone brought up real estate. Someone else mentioned a new Pilates studio. Lydia went on about her cruise points and how she'd finally earned enough for a free Mediterranean upgrade. Every sentence felt like a plastered-on laugh track from a show I was never invited to join. Bria came back in, her cheeks flushed from running outside. She sat on the arm of my chair instead of returning to her own. She looked around the table, and I watched her eyes dart from face to face like she was memorizing something important. As the table buzzed with wedding photos and vacation plans, my daughter leaned in and whispered, "No one asked if you're okay." "No," I whispered back. They didn't. Talia glanced down the table once, met my eyes for a fraction of a second, then quickly turned back to the conversation. She was laughing. At Trey's joke, maybe. Or pretending to. Bria stayed beside me, picking at a corner of her dress. The room had grown louder, fuller with the laughter of people who didn't know they'd left something bleeding behind them. "Daddy," Bria said softly, her voice barely audible above the clatter of silverware. "Can I say something?" I looked at her. Really looked. Of course. She stood. Right there, at the long table covered in floral centerpieces and mimosa pitchers, she stood. Her chair scraped softly against the floor as every adult head turned toward her. Talia's smile faltered. "Bria," she said, a warning tucked inside her name. But Bria didn't stop. "My dad almost died," she said, her voice clear. Small, but unwavering. He had surgery. Real surgery. And he was alone. Mommy was at the wedding. No one came. A stunned hush fell over the table. I wrote Mommy a letter. She read it. But none of you said sorry, she added, holding up the folded discharge paper like it was a flag of truth. You were busy with cake and dresses. Cassie's mouth parted. Lydia blinked. Trey coughed into his napkin. Talia stared at her daughter as if she didn't recognize her. I just thought you should know, Bria finished. Then she sat back down beside me, tucking Henry, who had been in her pocket, into her lap like a shield. The silence wasn't awkward. It was seismic. It cracked something open that had been sealed too long. I reached for Bria's hand and squeezed it. She didn't look at me, just sat still, proud and calm. Talia tried to recover, raising her glass in some kind of false transition, but it was too late. The mood had shifted. The performance had ended. The truth had taken center stage. That day, we left before dessert. Talia didn't speak on the way home. Bria fell asleep in the back seat, Henry tucked under her chin. And me? I drove in silence, but inside, I was standing. Finally standing. Because my daughter had said the words that had lived inside me for weeks. And there was no taking them back. We didn't talk much the night after the brunch. The silence wasn't cold, it was calcified. Like something ancient had finally cracked wide open, and no one dared touch the shards just yet. Talia barely looked at me as she paced the kitchen, her footsteps softer than usual, as though she didn't want to rattle anything else loose. Bria had gone straight to her room, a quiet trail of glitter from her hair clip marking her path. She didn't say she was tired. She didn't ask for cartoons. She just climbed into bed, pulled the blanket to her chin, and turned her face toward the wall. I stood outside her door for a moment, unsure if I should knock or just let her rest. In the end, I chose to sit on the floor outside, the weight of the day still pressing into my chest. It wasn't just what she'd said, it was the way she'd said it. Steady, clear, not a tantrum, not an outburst, a declaration. She had spoken for me, yes, but she'd also spoken for herself, because she'd been watching, listening, waiting. The next morning, the house was awkwardly quiet. Talia tiptoed through breakfast, pouring cereal like it was a peace offering. She placed the bowl in front of Bria, who stirred the spoon without eating, eyes fixed on the milk slowly turning beige from the flakes. I was thinking, Talia said cautiously, maybe we should have a movie night tonight. Order pizza, just the three of us. Bria didn't respond. I cleared my throat. Bria? She looked up at me. Do we have to pretend again? Talia froze. Her lips parted slightly. Pretend what? Bria's eyes locked on her mother's with the kind of honesty that only comes from children before the world teaches them to dilute truth. That everything's fine. That you didn't forget Daddy in the hospital. That no one at brunch cared. Talia's hand tightened around the cereal box. That's not fair. It's not supposed to be, Bria replied. There was no anger in her voice. Just facts. A child's math. And the numbers didn't lie. Talia looked at me then, as if begging for intervention, a bridge, a softened version of the moment. But I didn't step in. I couldn't. Bria slid off the stool and disappeared down the hall again. I waited for the slam of a door, but it never came. She's a child, Talia said, the edge in her voice growing. You think that was appropriate? At a family brunch? She's a child, I repeated, who watched her father go into surgery alone and come out to a party you never left. She doesn't understand the full context. She understands enough, I said. More than most adults in that room. Talia shook her head and turned her back to me, wiping a perfectly clean counter. You always take her side. I sighed, my fingers curling into the armrest. There shouldn't be sides, Talia. That's the problem. She didn't respond. Just scrubbed harder, like the silence was something she could wipe away. Later that day, Bria reappeared with her drawing notebook. She sat beside me on the couch and opened to a new page, flipping past sketches of Henry the Turtle and lopsided family portraits. What are you working on now? I asked. She looked up, her eyes wide. I'm writing my speech. I raised a brow. Speech? She nodded. In case I have to say it again. I swallowed hard. You don't have to do that, sweetheart. You said what needed to be said. But what if they still don't get it? She asked, tapping her pen against her notebook. What if they pretend again? Her question hit me in a place I'd been avoiding, because pretending was how Talia and I had survived so long. Pretending that distance was routine. That silence meant peace. That forgetting someone in the most vulnerable moment of their life could somehow be brushed over with matching napkins and champagne flutes. They might, I admitted. But that doesn't mean you have to stay quiet. She kept writing. That evening, Talia approached with a stiffness in her spine. She held her phone in one hand and a pair of folded pajamas in the other. I told Mom we won't be coming next weekend, she said, voice flat. I nodded. I said we needed time as a family. Another nod. She set the phone down and looked at me, her eyes searching. Do you want to talk? I think we've done enough talking, I replied. Now it's about listening. To what? To Bria. To yourself. To what this house has become. She lowered herself onto the edge of the armchair across from me, the weight of it finally catching up. I didn't mean to let it get like this. I said nothing. Regret wasn't currency anymore. It couldn't be traded for love. I thought I was doing what I had to keep up appearances, to be the kind of wife, the kind of friend. You stopped being a partner. The sentence cut through the space between us like a blade. And you stopped asking me to be one, she added, quietly. I paused, surprised by the truth in her reply. You gave up on me, she whispered. And I didn't know how to fight for something that didn't want to be held anymore. The room tilted in that moment, not in rage, not in sorrow, in honesty. Finally. But honesty comes late sometimes. And it doesn't always rebuild what's fallen. From down the hall, we heard Bria humming. A soft, tuneless melody that drifted into the silence like a thread trying to stitch something back together. Talia's voice cracked. Is it too late? I don't know, I said. But if you're asking me that now, it means you finally started to care again. She blinked back the sting in her eyes. I don't know how to fix this. You don't fix it, I told her. You show up. And you stop expecting praise for doing the bare minimum. She looked away, ashamed. Bria came back out moments later, clutching her notebook. Can I read you something? Talia nodded. I did too. She climbed into my lap, opened to a page, and read slowly, her voice clear. When someone you love is hurting, you're supposed to sit with them. Not scroll through parties. Not leave them alone. If you forget someone when they're scared, they won't feel safe around you again, even if you smile later. So I want people to know what hurting sounds like, so they won't do it too. Talia cried then. Not sobbed, not wailed, but cried. Quietly. The kind of cry that comes from being seen as the villain in a story you didn't realize was being written. Bria closed the notebook, satisfied, and placed Henry in her mother's lap. He keeps secrets, she said. But you shouldn't. And with that, Bria went back to her room. And Talia finally sat still. Really, really still. The thing about healing is that no one tells you how quiet it is. Not peaceful quiet, just still. The kind of still that follows an explosion. The kind that lets you hear your own breath and realize how long you've been holding it. The morning after Bria read her letter aloud, the house didn't bounce back. It didn't buzz with apologies or hum with reconciliation. It just existed in that gray space between damage and decision. Talia was different, yes, but not changed. She moved more softly, spoke more gently, but the air around her still vibrated with discomfort, with guilt. The kind that wants to be forgiven without truly knowing how to ask. I noticed she'd been wearing her wedding ring again. She'd stopped for a while, probably without realizing. It had sat unused in the dish by the sink for weeks. But now it was back, quietly slipped on, like maybe it could speak for her when she couldn't. She made breakfast that morning, blueberry pancakes, Bria's favorite. She asked me if I wanted coffee. I said no. We didn't talk much. We hadn't since Bria's words turned the house into something resembling a courtroom. After Bria left for school, hugging me twice, telling me I looked almost healed, Talia and I stood in the kitchen alone. She leaned against the counter, arms folded, eyes scanning the room like it was a stranger's home. I've been trying, she said, almost in a whisper. I know. She looked at me then. I don't know if it matters now. I nodded. It does. Just not the way you hoped. She swallowed hard. You're not here anymore, are you? My eyes didn't flinch. I'm in the house. But I haven't been home for a long time. The words didn't come with fire. They weren't meant to wound. They were just the truth. I didn't think it would come to this, she murmured, her voice shaky. Neither did I. She reached into the drawer beside her, pulled out a folded paper, and placed it on the counter between us. It was an apology letter. Handwritten. The kind people write when they've been coached on accountability, when they finally understand what harm feels like from the other side. I didn't pick it up. I wrote it, she said, tapping it once. But I think I'm too late. You are, I said, gently. But thank you for writing it anyway. She nodded, her fingers twitching nervously. What now? It wasn't the first time she'd asked that question. but it was the first time she said it without expecting me to carry the answer. I've been looking at places, I said. Nothing far. Just enough to breathe. Her eyes didn't widen. She didn't gasp. I think, somewhere inside, she knew it was coming. Maybe she had known for years and just kept hoping that if we both stayed silent long enough, the story would rewrite itself. For Bria? She asked, voice cracking. For all of us, I said. She needs to see that love isn't supposed to feel like waiting. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. I don't want to lose my family. You lost me the moment I realized you'd rather protect a party than hold my hand in an emergency room, I said. This is just the part where we stop pretending it didn't happen. She reached for the counter, steadying herself like the floor had moved. I never hated you, I added. Even when it hurt. I just kept hoping you'd see me again. But you didn't. And Bria did. That's what saved me. She sat down then, in the kitchen chair that still had a tiny sticker Bria had stuck on months ago, a glittery dolphin that had refused to peel off cleanly. She didn't speak again for several minutes. I'll tell her, I said, about what's happening. And I'll do it kindly. I won't poison her against you. Her shoulders slumped in relief. Thank you. She doesn't need to carry our failure, I added. She just needs to see us handle it with care. The words settled in the room like soft dust, landing on everything. That afternoon, I picked Bria up from school. She came running toward me, backpack bouncing, her smile wide and unburdened. I braced for the questions, she always had them. But instead, she slipped her hand into mine and walked quietly to the car. In the driveway, before climbing in, she looked up at me. You're moving out, aren't you? I froze. Who told you? She smiled sadly. No one. I just know. I heard you say you needed to breathe. I crouched to her level, wincing slightly from the healing stitches, and tucked a curl behind her ear. I love you more than anything. That's not changing. I know, she whispered. I'll be close. You'll see me every day. Weekends. After school. We'll have our routines. She nodded slowly. Can I have 2 bedrooms? One here and one there. You can have 2 homes, I said. And one heart that's always yours. She hugged me so tightly I had to breathe through it. When we got inside, Talia was waiting in the living room. Bria ran to her and hugged her without hesitation. I saw the surprise in Talia's eyes, the way she held her daughter like she was made of glass. I want you both to be happy, Bria said. That night, I began packing a small bag, just the essentials. I wasn't rushing, but I wasn't dragging my feet either. Talia helped in silence. She folded one of my sweatshirts and placed it in the duffel without looking at me. When I reached the door, Bria stopped me. Wait, she said, running to her room. She came back with Henry. He wants to go with you this time. I smiled through the tightness in my chest and took the stuffed turtle, worn and beloved. Thank you, I said. She hugged me again, and this time, I let my tears fall. I didn't hide them. I didn't turn away. Talia stood by the door, arms folded, eyes wet, but no longer filled with panic. Just acceptance. You'll be okay, I said to her. So will she. I hope you find your breath again, she whispered. I already have, I said, stepping out into the quiet. And for the first time in a long, long time, the silence didn't hurt. It healed. There was a time when I thought my life was the kind of thing people envied. Not because I was flashy or rich, but because I had what most people spend a lifetime searching for. A solid marriage, a home filled with laughter, and a best friend I could count on. Olivia and I had been married for 5 years, and sure, like any couple, we had our ups and downs, but I never thought for a second that the downs would be enough to ruin us. I remember the way she used to look at me in the beginning, that gleam in her eye, like I was the center of her world. We had built our lives together, brick by brick, through sleepless nights and endless dreams. I worked long hours at the firm, but I made sure Olivia never felt neglected. Friday nights were our thing. Movie nights with Chinese takeout, her head resting against my chest as we watched the same rom-coms she loved, even though I could barely tolerate them. Daniel was part of that life too, my best friend since college. If there was one person I trusted outside of my marriage, it was him. We met during our first year of university, bonded over late-night study sessions, and our mutual hatred for calculus. Through the years, we remained inseparable, standing by each other's sides through job losses, heartbreaks, and even my wedding. He was my best man, the guy who gave the toast about how I was the luckiest man alive to have found someone like Olivia. Back then, I agreed with him. I was lucky. But luck, I would soon learn, is the most fleeting thing in the world. It wasn't like Olivia and Daniel spent an unusual amount of time together. At least, not at first. They had known each other for years because of me, and they got along. Maybe too well. I used to joke that Olivia and Daniel had their own secret friendship, given how often they'd tease me, tag-teaming in conversations. It never bothered me. If anything, I was grateful my wife and best friend got along so seamlessly. Then, little things started to change. Olivia began pulling away in ways I couldn't quite put my finger on. Our conversations became shorter, more distant. If I reached for her at night, she'd turn away, murmuring about being tired. Her phone, which used to be casually left on the nightstand, was now always face down, notifications silenced. I noticed, of course, but I brushed it off. Every couple goes through phases, right? We were busy. We had our own stresses. It was nothing. And then there was Daniel. He started canceling our usual weekend basketball games, claiming he was too swamped with work. He barely returned my calls, and when we did hang out, something was off. It was in the way he avoided my eyes, the way he cut conversations short. Looking back now, I hate how naive I was, how easily I accepted their half-hearted excuses, how I ignored the signs that should have been screaming at me. But at the time, I trusted them both with everything I had. So when Olivia started working late more often, when she came home smelling like cologne that wasn't mine, I convinced myself I was imagining things. I told myself I was being paranoid, overthinking things because of work stress. The house was dark when I arrived. No sign of Olivia. No message explaining why she hadn't come. I sat on the couch, waiting. Midnight came and went. My phone remained silent. It wasn't until past 2 a.m. that I heard the front door creak open. Olivia walked in, her heels in one hand, her hair slightly disheveled, her lips swollen in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. I didn't say a word. I just watched as she froze in the doorway, realizing I was still awake. "Oh," she said, as if I were some inconvenience she hadn't expected to deal with. "You're up." I stood. "Where were you?" She hesitated, just for a second. But that second told me everything. "Work ran late," she finally said, brushing past me. "I didn't have my phone." Lie. I could feel it. The words were too smooth, too rehearsed. But I didn't push, because some part of me was still clinging to the illusion that everything was okay. That this woman, my wife, the person I built my world around, wouldn't betray me. If I had known then what I know now, I wouldn't have let it slide. I would have demanded the truth right there, that very night. But I didn't. I let her walk past me, let her climb into bed, let myself believe that things would go back to normal, that everything was just a misunderstanding. But it wasn't. It was the beginning of the end, and I was the only one who didn't see it coming. I don't know how long I stood in the doorway, watching Olivia walk past me like I was nothing more than an afterthought. Maybe it was seconds, maybe minutes. Time didn't feel real in that moment. She didn't even look at me as she tossed her heels near the door and made her way upstairs. I heard the rustle of her dress being pulled over her head, the soft thud as it hit the floor. The bed creaked as she climbed in, like it was just another night, like she hadn't just spent hours in another man's arms. I didn't follow her, not right away. Instead, I sat on the couch, staring at the flickering light of the television. Some late-night show I wasn't paying attention to. My mind felt like it was splitting in two. One part of me, the logical, rational side, knew something was terribly wrong, that the woman I had vowed to spend the rest of my life with was slipping away. But the other part, the desperate, delusional part, it kept whispering that maybe I was overreacting, that I was tired, that I was stressed, that I was imagining things. So I convinced myself that I just needed to talk to her, clear the air, fix whatever was broken before it was too late. I turned off the TV and made my way upstairs, my footsteps careful, measured. Olivia was lying on her side, her back facing me. Her breathing was steady, but I could tell she wasn't asleep. "Liv," I said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. No response. I reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. She flinched. That one movement, small, barely perceptible, shattered something inside me. I swallowed, my throat dry. "Can we talk?" A heavy sigh. Then she turned over, finally looking at me. Her expression was unreadable, detached. "What is there to talk about?" she said flatly. I blinked. "Our anniversary, for starters." She closed her eyes briefly before letting out another sigh. "Michael, I told you. I got caught up at work." "Without your phone?" She hesitated for just a second before shaking her head. "I was busy. I didn't think to check it." Lie. I knew it. She knew it. The air between us felt suffocating, heavy with everything we weren't saying. "Liv," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Are you? Is there someone else?" For a moment, I thought she might deny it, that she might laugh, roll her eyes, call me ridiculous. But instead, she went quiet. And in that silence, I got my answer. My chest tightened, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. My hands clenched into fists on my lap. "How long?" I asked, my voice hoarse. She didn't answer. I forced myself to look at her, really look at her. The way her lips were slightly swollen, the faint scent of cologne that wasn't mine lingering on her skin, the exhaustion in her eyes, not the kind that comes from work, but from a different kind of exertion. I stood abruptly, my body thrumming with a rage I could barely contain. "Who is it?" Another silence. And then, "You don't want to know," she said, her voice almost gentle. I laughed, a short, humorless sound that felt foreign even to me. "Oh, I promise you I do." She sat up, running a hand through her hair. She wouldn't meet my eyes. And that's when I felt it, the slow, creeping realization. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Because I already knew. Because deep down, I had known for a long time. A sickening dread pooled in my stomach. "Olivia," I said, my voice dangerously low. "Tell me, right now." She took a deep breath, and then, "It's Daniel." The world tilted. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. My breath knocked out of me. I had braced myself for the worst, but even my worst expectations hadn't prepared me for that name. Daniel, my best friend, my brother in all but blood, the man I had trusted with everything. For a moment, I was convinced I had misheard her, that my brain was playing some cruel trick on me. But she was looking at me now, and there was no mistaking the truth in her eyes. It was him. It had been him all along. I took a step back, needing space, needing air. The room suddenly felt too small, the walls closing in on me. My heart was hammering so hard in my chest I thought it might explode. I wanted to scream, to hit something, to demand how, why, but all I could manage was a whisper. "How long?" Her lips parted, then closed again, as if she was debating whether to tell me the truth or spare me the final blow. Then she exhaled and said, "A year." I nearly collapsed. A year. My best friend. My wife. For an entire year, they had been betraying me behind my back, smiling in my face, pretending. And I, idiot that I was, had welcomed it, had welcomed him into our home, had called him my brother. A strangled sound escaped me, half laugh, half sob. I had been played. I had been a fool. I looked at her, at the woman I had vowed to love until death do us part, and realized I didn't even know who she was anymore. "I want you out," I finally said, my voice hollow. Something flickered in her expression, something almost sad, but she masked it quickly. "That won't be necessary," she said coolly. "Daniel and I, we're moving in together." My stomach twisted. "You're what?" She stood, smoothing out her dress like she hadn't just ripped my heart out of my chest. "I fell in love with him, Michael," she said. "And we're expecting a baby." Silence. For the first time in my life, I understood what true devastation felt like. I stumbled backward, my legs weak beneath me. She reached for me then, as if to offer some pathetic attempt at comfort. I flinched away. "Get out," I said again, my voice shaking. "Now." She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. And just like that, she walked away, leaving me standing there, shattered beyond repair. I stood in the middle of the house, my house, staring at the empty space where Olivia had been just moments ago. The weight of her words pressed down on me like a crushing force. Daniel. She had chosen Daniel, my best friend, my brother in all but blood, and they were expecting a child. I clenched my fists so tightly that my nails dug into my palms, the sharp pain grounding me in reality. This wasn't a nightmare I could wake up from. This was my life now. A cruel joke. I staggered toward the living room, my legs weak, my chest heaving with every breath. I needed to sit down, to process. But how the hell does anyone process something like this? 1 year. For an entire damn year, the two people I trusted most had been making a fool out of me. Olivia had been sleeping beside me, smiling at me, telling me she loved me, while she was carrying on an affair with my so-called best friend. I let out a hollow laugh. I had been so blind. The sound of movement upstairs snapped me out of my daze. I pushed myself up, taking unsteady steps toward the staircase. Olivia was packing. My wife was packing up her things to leave me for Daniel. I should have stopped her. I should have screamed, demanded answers, thrown her out myself, but I didn't. I just stood at the bottom of the stairs, listening to the rustling of fabric, the occasional clink of her jewelry box. It was surreal. Then she came down, a suitcase in one hand, her other resting gently on her stomach. Her stomach. I couldn't look at her. She hesitated for a moment, as if debating whether to say something. Then, with a quiet sigh, she finally spoke. "You'll be okay, Michael." I let out a bitter chuckle. "Oh, will I? Thanks for the reassurance, Olivia. Really helps." She flinched, and for a brief second, I thought I saw guilt flicker across her face. But it was gone just as quickly as it came. "Daniel will pick up the rest of my things later," she said softly. I clenched my jaw. Of course he would. That coward hadn't even bothered to show his face tonight. Probably afraid I'd knock his teeth out. I should have. Instead, I just nodded stiffly. "Fine." She looked at me one last time, her eyes filled with something I couldn't name. Then, without another word, she walked out the door. And just like that, my marriage was over. I stood there, frozen, listening to the sound of her car engine roaring to life. It wasn't until I heard her drive away that the dam finally broke. I collapsed onto the couch, my chest tightening, the weight of everything crashing down on me all at once. My breaths came out in sharp, ragged gasps. I had lost everything. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the wall, my mind an empty void. Minutes? Hours? Then my phone buzzed. I grabbed it, half expecting, hoping, that it was Olivia calling to say this was all some horrible mistake. It wasn't her. It was Daniel. I stared at his name flashing on the screen, my pulse pounding. My hand shook as I pressed answer. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then he sighed. "Mike, man, I'm sorry." I hung up. I couldn't listen to him. Not after what he had done. I wanted to scream, to break something, to drive to wherever the hell they were, and make him feel even a fraction of the pain I was feeling. But what would be the point? She was gone. Daniel had one. And I was nothing but a broken man sitting in an empty house. The days that followed blurred together. I didn't go to work. I didn't answer my phone. I barely ate. News of Olivia's affair spread quickly through our social circle. Some people reached out, offering their condolences like I had just suffered some tragic accident. Others, people I once considered friends, acted indifferent. One of Olivia's friends had the audacity to text me, "You should be happy for them. Things like this happen. Maybe you and Olivia weren't meant to be." I stared at the message, my blood boiling. Happy? Happy that my wife had thrown me away like garbage? That my best friend had stolen her right from under my nose? I deleted the text and blocked the number. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered anymore. Until the knock at the door. I opened it, expecting another pity visit from one of my coworkers. Instead, I found Sophia, Daniel's ex. She stood there, her arms crossed, her lips curled into something that was almost a smile. "Hey, Mike," she said, tilting her head. "Looks like we're in the same boat, huh?" I blinked at her, still in a daze. "Sophia?" She let out a short, humorless laugh. "Surprised to see me? I figured we should talk. You know, about the two people who screwed us over." I stepped aside, wordlessly inviting her in. I had no idea then that this moment, this conversation, would change everything. Sophia stepped into my house, the house Olivia and I built together, The one where we had spent years making memories, now reduced to nothing more than a shell. She glanced around, her sharp eyes taking in the half-empty wine bottle on the coffee table, the unopened takeout containers for meals I had no appetite to eat, and the mess I hadn't bothered to clean up since Olivia left. "Well, you look like hell," she said bluntly, dropping her purse onto the couch. I let out a dry laugh, rubbing my temples. "Yeah, well, what do you expect? My wife left me for my best friend." Sophia scoffed, crossing her arms. "Correction, our exes left us for each other. You're not the only one who got burned, Michael." I looked at her properly for the first time. Sophia had always been striking. Dark hair, piercing eyes, and the kind of presence that commanded attention. But now, there was something else in her expression. Something sharp. "Why are you here?" I asked, my voice hoarse from days of drinking and silence. She smirked. "Because I'm not the kind of woman who lets betrayal slide. And something tells me, neither are you." I frowned, shaking my head. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about them, Michael," she said, leaning forward. "Olivia and Daniel. They didn't just betray us. They humiliated us. And you're just going to sit here and let them win?" I let out a bitter chuckle, sinking onto the couch. "What the hell do you want me to do, Sophia? Storm their house and drag them out by their hair?" She raised an eyebrow. "Tempting, but no. I have a better idea." I exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over my face. "Sophia, I'm not in the mood for whatever revenge fantasy you're cooking up. I paused, my throat tightening. "I just need to get through this." Sophia sighed, but her expression softened, just a little. "I get it, Michael. Believe me, I do. The first week after Daniel dumped me for your wife, I was a mess. But then I realized something. I'm not the one who should be suffering. They should." I shook my head. "And how exactly do you plan on making them suffer?" She leaned in, her voice low and steady. "Daniel's business is struggling." I blinked. "What?" Her lips curled into a slow smile. "He doesn't talk about it much, but I know things. His company is barely staying afloat. If we play this right, we can make sure he loses everything." I should have ignored her. I should have told her I wasn't interested in revenge. But something inside me, something dark and wounded, leaned forward. "Go on," I said. Sophia grinned. "I knew you'd see things my way." Sophia left that night, but her words stayed with me. I tried to go back to normal, to pick up the pieces of my life and pretend that I could move on. But normal no longer existed. The next few weeks were a blur of anger, drinking, and sleepless nights. I ignored calls from work, dodged concerned messages from the few friends I had left, and barely ate. One night, I found myself driving past Olivia and Daniel's new place. It was a nice house. Big. Probably one of those overpriced places in a gated community. I could see the warm glow of their living room through the large windows. And then, I saw them. Olivia was curled up on the couch, her head resting on Daniel's shoulder. He was stroking her hair, whispering something that made her laugh. My stomach twisted. That should have been me. That was our life. Our future. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. They didn't look guilty. They didn't look like people who had just destroyed someone's life. They looked happy. That was the moment something inside me snapped. The next morning, I called Sophia. "Tell me what you know about Daniel's business," I said, skipping the pleasantries. She sounded pleased. "I was hoping you'd come around." We met at a quiet cafe downtown, away from prying eyes. Sophia laid everything out. Daniel's company was bleeding money. Investors were pulling out, his biggest clients were losing faith, and if things continued the way they were going, he'd be bankrupt within a year. "All we need to do," she said, stirring her coffee, "is give it a little push." I frowned. "And how exactly do we do that?" She smirked. "We make sure his biggest investor pulls out. Permanently." I let out a slow breath. "And how do we make that happen?" Sophia leaned in, her eyes gleaming. "Leave that to me." While Sophia handled Daniel's downfall, I focused on rebuilding myself. I threw myself into work, accepting a new offer from an investment firm that happened to be one of Daniel's biggest competitors. Mr. Hargrove, the CEO, took a liking to me. Within weeks, I was climbing the ranks, earning a reputation as one of the most promising strategists in the company. I hit the gym, cut out the alcohol, and worked harder than I ever had before. And slowly, I started feeling like myself again. Only, I wasn't the same man Olivia had walked out on. That man had been weak, gullible. That man had been destroyed. The man I was becoming? He was going to make them pay. 3 months later, Daniel lost his biggest investor. Sophia had played her role perfectly. She had convinced the investor that Daniel's company was too unstable, too risky. The fallout was immediate. News spread. Clients started backing out. And Daniel? He was panicking. Olivia had no idea what was happening. As far as she knew, their life was perfect. She was pregnant, playing the role of the doting fiancé, planning her new future. Meanwhile, Daniel was scrambling, desperate to keep everything from falling apart. He had no idea that the person pulling the strings, the person ruining him, was the man he had betrayed. And this was just the beginning. I wasn't going to stop until I took everything from him, just like he had taken everything from me. The shift was subtle at first. Daniel started showing signs of stress, bags under his eyes, erratic movements, a sharpness to his words that hadn't been there before. I knew because I watched. Every move, every misstep. I didn't just want him to suffer. I wanted him to feel it, to know what it was like to have everything you built crumble beneath your feet. Olivia, oblivious as always, continued playing house with him. She had no idea that the foundation of their new life was rotting from the inside. And the best part? She didn't even see me coming. Setting the trap, Sophia and I met in a high-end restaurant downtown. She looked radiant, dressed in an expensive black dress, sipping a martini like we weren't plotting someone's downfall over appetizers. "You've been watching him," she noted, smirking. I nodded, stirring my whiskey. "He's slipping." She leaned forward, her voice lowering. "Good. Now we speed things up." I raised a brow. "How?" She grinned. "You have Hargrove wrapped around your finger now, don't you?" I exhaled, nodding. Mr. Hargrove, my boss, had become something of a mentor to me. He respected my insight, trusted my instincts. And best of all, his firm was one of the biggest investment players in the city, which meant we controlled the narrative. "I think it's time we feed him some bad intel," Sophia continued, swirling her drink. "Make sure the right people hear that Daniel's company is on its last legs. Push it over the edge." I smirked. "You're ruthless." She grinned. "And you love it." She wasn't wrong. The execution the next day, I scheduled a meeting with Hargrove. We sat in his office, the floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city. "You've been keeping an eye on Whitmore Capital?" I asked casually, referring to Daniel's company. Hargrove leaned back, crossing his arms. "I have. It's been struggling, hasn't it?" I nodded. "More than they're letting on. Their revenue stream is drying up. Investors are getting nervous." Hargrove raised an eyebrow. "And how do you know this?" I leaned in slightly, my voice steady. "Let's just say I have sources." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "If what you're saying is true, this might be the right time to pull the plug on any partnerships we've been considering with them." I took a sip of my coffee, masking my satisfaction. "Probably a smart move," I said. It was done. With one conversation, I had planted the seed. By the time the whispers reached the right ears, Daniel's business would take a hit he wouldn't recover from, and he'd have no idea where it came from. Cracks in their perfect life. A week later, I heard through mutual acquaintances that Daniel had lost another major investor. His company was officially drowning. And the best part? He had no clue I was behind it. I imagined him sitting at his desk, staring at spreadsheets that didn't add up, watching as his so-called empire burned around him. He had stolen my wife. Now, I was stealing everything else. But I wasn't done yet. No, I wanted him to lose more. I wanted Olivia to start doubting him. The beginning of Olivia's regret, I ran into her by accident, or at least, that's what she thought. It was at a small cafe near my office. I had made sure to be there, knowing she frequented the place. She was sitting alone, her baby bump more noticeable now. Someone better. I sharpened my mind just as much as my body. Work became my battlefield. I put in longer hours, took on bigger projects, and within months, My reputation at Hargrove's firm skyrocketed. Clients requested me by name. Executives nodded in approval when I entered a room. I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. And the best part? They had no idea. While I was climbing to the top, Daniel was sinking. Sophia kept me updated. Every few days, I'd get a text or a casual remark over coffee. Sophia, he lost another contract today. He looked like he was going to throw up in the office. Sophia, investors are pulling out left and right. His company is bleeding. Sophia, rumor has it he's starting to panic. I would read those messages and smile. It was happening. Everything I had set in motion. The whispers in the right ears, the lost contracts, the financial strain, was finally tightening around his neck. And the beauty of it? He still had no idea it was me. Then came the part one had been waiting for. The part where Olivia started to see the cracks. It was slow at first. A missed dinner because Daniel was working late, more like scrambling to save his company. A tense conversation in public where she reached for his hand, and he pulled away. A tired look in her eyes when she thought no one was watching. But I was watching, and Sophia made sure to keep me informed. One night, she called me, her voice laced with amusement. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "Try me." She let out a chuckle. "I ran into Olivia today." That got my attention. "Where?" "The doctor's office." She was alone. No Daniel in sight. My grip on the phone tightened. Her pregnancy checkup? Him. I could practically hear the smirk in her voice. She looked miserable, Michael. Like she was finally realizing that she traded gold for garbage. I exhaled slowly, leaning back in my chair. "Good." Sophia laughed. I wish you could have seen her face when I told her I had a new boyfriend. That made me pause. "You did what?" She giggled. "I may have hinted that my life is so much better now, that my new guy treats me like a queen." I let out a short laugh, shaking my head. "You're evil. And you love it." I didn't deny it. Because she was right. Because while Olivia and Daniel had spent the past year playing house, I had been busy, building, plotting, becoming untouchable. And now? Now, it was time for the next step in my plan. The mall encounter. I hadn't seen Olivia in months. Not since that night at the lounge, where I made sure she saw just how well I was doing without her. So when I turned the corner at the mall and saw her standing there, holding a baby stroller, I almost laughed at the irony. She was pushing a sleeping infant, her hands gripping the handle a little too tightly. She looked tired. No makeup, dark circles under her eyes. Her clothes, while still stylish, didn't have that effortless elegance she once carried. This was not the Olivia I had once known. And when she looked up and saw me, her face went pale. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something, but no words came out. I smirked. "Olivia." She swallowed, blinking rapidly. Michael." Her voice wavered. I could see the storm of emotions behind her eyes. Shock, regret, something dangerously close to longing. I let the moment stretch, savoring the way she squirmed under my gaze. Then, I made my move. Reversing the power dynamic, I glanced at the stroller. "So, this is the child you threw everything away for?" She winced. "Michael, don't." I cut her off with a chuckle, shaking my head. "Relax, Olivia. I'm just making conversation." I let my eyes sweep over her, deliberately slow. "You look different." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "It's been a long year." I tilted my head. "Has it?" She exhaled sharply, looking away. "You wouldn't understand." I laughed. A deep, genuine laugh that made her flinch. "Oh, Olivia, I understand more than you think." Her gaze snapped back to mine, searching my face for any sign of weakness. But there was none. The man standing before her was not the same man she had left behind, and she knew it. I could see it in the way she hesitated, the way her fingers twitched nervously against the stroller. She had expected me to be broken, bitter, pathetic, but instead, I was thriving, and that realization was killing her. The final blow, I could have ended the conversation there. I could have walked away, leaving her stewing in her regret. But where was the fun in that? So I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice just enough to make her hang on every word. "I heard about Daniel." Her shoulders stiffened. What about him? I shrugged, feigning nonchalance. That his business is tanking. That he's drowning in debt. That he's not handling the pressure well. Her face paled even more, confirming what I already suspected. Their perfect life was anything but. I smirked. Didn't take long, did it? Her breath hitched, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. But then, the moment I had been waiting for finally arrived. She whispered, almost too softly, I made a mistake. Boom. There it was. The confession. The regret. The proof that I had one. I let her words hang in the air for a moment, then chuckled, stepping back. Yeah, you did. Her eyes snapped up to mine, a flicker of desperation in them. Michael, I raised a hand, cutting her off. Save it, Olivia. Then, as if the universe had scripted this moment perfectly, Sophia appeared at my side. She wrapped her arm around mine, her smile bright and knowing. Hey, babe. Sorry I took so long. I turned to her, my smirk widening. No problem, sweetheart. Then, I kissed her. A slow, deliberate kiss, just long enough for Olivia to see. When I pulled away, Olivia looked like she had been slapped. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time in her life, Olivia was speechless. And that was the sweetest revenge of all. I took Sophia's hand, nodded at Olivia, and without another word, walked away, leaving her standing there, drowning in her own regret, exactly where she belonged. I walked away from Olivia with Sophia by my side, feeling lighter than I had in over a year. For the first time, I wasn't the one left standing in the wreckage. No, this time, it was Olivia who looked like she had been sucker punched. And damn, it felt good. But I wasn't done yet. Because the next phase of my plan, that was going to be even better. The aftermath of our encounter, I could feel Olivia's eyes on my back as I left the mall with Sophia. She was stunned, hurt, jealous, and I wanted her to sit in that feeling. I didn't need her back. I didn't want her back, but I wanted her to want me back, to crave the life she threw away, to realize that she had lost the best thing that ever happened to her. Sophia must have sensed it too, because as soon as we stepped into the parking lot, she let out a satisfied laugh. Well, she mused, leaning against my car, that was fun. I smirked, unlocking the doors. Did you see her face? Sophia grinned. She looked like she wanted to crawl into a hole. I nodded, feeling an odd sense of vindication. Olivia had made her choice. And now? She was realizing it was the wrong one. Olivia reaches out. I knew it wouldn't take long. That's the thing about people like Olivia. They always come crawling back when it's too late. Sure enough, 2 days later, I got a text from an unknown number. I already knew who it was before I even opened it. Olivia, can we talk? I stared at the screen, my smirk widening. She had no idea that she was playing right into my hands. I didn't respond immediately. I let her stew in it. An hour later, another message popped up. Olivia, please, Michael. It's important. Oh, now it was important? Where was this urgency when she was shoving me out of my own house? When she was choosing Daniel over me? I took a sip of my whiskey, debating whether to ignore her completely. But then, I had a better idea. I responded. Meet me at the Grandview Cafe. 6 p.m. No questions. No explanations. I knew she'd come. Because she needed to. The meeting that changed everything at 5:55 p.m., I was already seated at a corner booth, casually scrolling through my phone. At 6:02 p.m., Olivia walked in. She looked nervous. Her eyes scanned the cafe until they landed on me, and when she finally met my gaze, I saw it. Regret, longing, desperation. I gestured to the seat across from me, keeping my expression unreadable. Have a seat. She hesitated, then obeyed. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She just stared at me, as if she was still processing how much I had changed. Finally, she broke the silence. You look good, she said softly. I smirked. I know. She flinched slightly, but I didn't care. I wasn't here to comfort her. I was here to watch her crumble. She swallowed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Michael, I raised a hand, cutting her off. Why am I here, Olivia? She exhaled slowly. I I needed to see you. I leaned back, feigning boredom. Why? She hesitated, then finally said the words I had been expecting. I made a mistake. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I just tilted my head, pretending to be intrigued. Oh. Her eyes searched mine, as if looking for some shred of the man who once loved her. Too bad. That man was dead. I thought Daniel was the right choice, she admitted, her voice cracking slightly. I thought we had something real. I raised an eyebrow. And now? She looked down at her hands. Now, I realize I was wrong. I let the words settle, watching her squirm. Then, I delivered the final blow. That's too bad, I said, my voice cold, unbothered. Because I moved on a long time ago. She froze. Her lips parted slightly, but nothing came out. She had expected me to welcome her back with open arms. To forgive. To give her another chance. But I wasn't that man anymore. And now? She had to live with her choice. I stood up, tossing a few bills onto the table. Take care, Olivia, I said, turning to leave. And as I walked away, I didn't look back. Because I had one. And Olivia? She was nothing more than a painful lesson I would never repeat. Walking out of that cafe, I felt weightless. For the first time in over a year, I wasn't haunted by Olivia's betrayal. I wasn't drowning in anger, in heartbreak, in the endless cycle of what-ifs. No, I had just watched her break, watched her finally understand the cost of her choices. And the best part? I felt nothing. No sadness. No pain. Not even a flicker of nostalgia. Because Olivia wasn't my problem anymore. But Daniel? Daniel was about to become one. Daniel's world starts to crumble a few days after my meeting with Olivia. Sophia called me. The second I picked up, she was laughing. You're not going to believe what I just found out, she said between chuckles. I smirked. Try me. She exhaled, amused. Daniel's company is officially done. He's drowning in legal trouble, unpaid debts, and, get this, his investors are suing him for fraud. I leaned back in my chair, grinning. Oh, that's beautiful. She hummed in agreement. I knew you'd appreciate it. I did. Because while Olivia was busy regretting her life choices, Daniel was paying for his sins in full. And the best part? He still had no idea I was the one who had orchestrated every single part of his downfall. But he was about to find out. The desperate phone call had happened 2 days later. My phone buzzed in the middle of the night. I frowned, glancing at the screen. Daniel. I let it ring. Once. Twice. 3 times. Then, out of pure amusement, I answered. Hello? I said lazily, suppressing a yawn. There was silence for a moment. Then, his voice came through, shaky, exhausted, defeated. Michael, he croaked. I need help. I bit back a laugh. Help? Help? After everything he had done? I leaned back against my pillow, smirking. Oh? And what exactly do you need help with, buddy? He let out a shaky breath. It's my company, man. I don't know what happened, but, oh, you don't? I cut in smoothly, feigning surprise. Wow, that must be tough. He hesitated. Michael, please. I'm drowning here. Investors pulled out. The legal fees are piling up, and Olivia. He stopped abruptly. Now, as I sat back and watched Daniel's empire collapse, I realized something. Revenge wasn't just sweet. It was addictive. Because every time I heard his name associated with failure, every time I caught whispers of his bankruptcy, legal battles, and desperation, I felt a deep, satisfying sense of justice. And I wasn't done yet. Not until he had nothing left. After that late-night phone call, Daniel disappeared from the corporate scene. Sophia kept tabs on him, feeding me updates every few days. Sophia. He's trying to negotiate with his creditors. It's not working. Sophia. Investors are demanding a full audit. If they find what I think they'll find, me, game over. Then, the final nail in his coffin came, a fraud investigation. Turns out, Daniel had been cooking the books for years, manipulating financial reports to make his company look more profitable than it was. Once the authorities caught wind of it, it was over. His assets were frozen. His company was officially shut down. And Daniel? He was broke. Utterly, completely, broke. No savings. No backup plan. No way out. I had made sure of that. It didn't take long before Olivia tried to reach out again. I saw the first call come in, her name flashing on my screen like a ghost from a past life. I ignored it. Then came the texts. Olivia. Michael, please. Can we talk? Olivia. I know I don't deserve it, but I need to see you. Olivia. I made a mistake. I smirked at that last one. Too little, too late. She had made her choice. And now, she was living with the consequences. I let her messages sit there, unanswered, while I went about my new life. Because I wasn't the same man she left behind. And she? She was nothing but a regret I no longer cared about. Just when I thought I had heard the last of him, Daniel showed up at my office. I was sitting in my high-rise corner office, overlooking the city, when my secretary buzzed me. Secretary. Sir, there's a Daniel Whitmore here to see you? I leaned back in my chair, a slow smirk spreading across my face. Me? Send him in. A moment later, the door opened, and there he was. Daniel Whitmore. The man who had once stolen my wife, my home, my peace of mind. Now, he looked like a ghost of himself. His suit was wrinkled. His face was unshaven. His once confident posture was slumped in defeat. I let him stand there for a moment, drinking in the sight of his humiliation. Then, I gestured to the chair across from me. Sit. He hesitated before lowering himself into the chair, his hands trembling slightly. I folded my hands together, tilting my head. To what do I owe the pleasure, Daniel? You're really not going to help me, he whispered. I smirked. No, Daniel, I'm not. Then, with a final glance at the broken man before me, I walked to the door and opened it. Get out. He hesitated for a second before standing up slowly. Then, with slumped shoulders and the weight of his own betrayal crushing him, he walked out of my office. And just like that, Daniel Whitmore was nothing. And I was finally free. I never expected my life to turn out like this. Not in a million years. From the window of my high-rise apartment in Greenwich, Connecticut, I could see the morning mist rolling over the neatly trimmed lawns below. It was the kind of neighborhood where every house had the same carefully pruned hedges, the same cobblestone driveways, and the same quiet, rehearsed charm. But behind those pristine white picket fences, I had come to learn, not everything was as perfect as it seemed. It had been 3 years since my father-in-law, Henry Whitmore, passed away. His death had been sudden, a heart attack in his sleep at 62. A well-respected accountant, he had provided well for his family, leaving behind a comfortable life for my mother-in-law, Margaret, and her 2 daughters, my wife, Lena, and her younger sister, Sophie. But comfortable wasn't enough for them. No, Margaret had a taste for luxury that far exceeded what Henry had left behind. I married Lena 5 years ago, believing I had found my perfect partner. She was smart, beautiful, and came from a family that seemed warm and close-knit. I admired their bond, their Sunday brunches, their Christmas traditions. I had lost my own parents young, so marrying into a family that prided itself on sticking together felt like a gift, a second chance at belonging. But somewhere along the way, I realized that what looked like love and loyalty was really entitlement and manipulation. I was the perfect target. I worked as a senior financial analyst at Whitman & Carter, one of the most prestigious investment firms in New York. My salary was substantial, but not infinite. I managed portfolios worth millions, making calculated decisions that impacted the wealth of powerful clients. Yet somehow, the biggest financial risk I had ever taken was marrying into this family. At first, I didn't notice the small ways I was being pulled into their financial web. Margaret had a modest public image, always talking about the importance of living within one's means, about humility and charity. But behind closed doors, she had a closet full of designer handbags and a kitchen stocked with imported wine. She donated heavily to the church, but it wasn't out of generosity, it was for status. She needed people to see her as a devoted widow still upholding her late husband's legacy. And then there was Sophie. Sophie, at 26, had grand dreams of becoming a fashion designer. She had talent, I'll give her that, but zero financial discipline. She landed a job at a high-end boutique in Manhattan, which should have been enough to support her lifestyle. But working around luxury only made her crave more. Every paycheck disappeared into handbags, shoes, and overpriced dinners. And when the credit card bills came, guess who she ran to? "I'll pay you back, Mark," she would say, standing at my door with a sheepish smile. "Next month for sure." Next month never came. Lena, of course, saw nothing wrong with it. "She's young. She's figuring things out," she would say dismissively. Besides, what's family for? Family. That word was wielded against me like a contract I never signed. What was I supposed to do? Let her ruin her credit? Let Margaret default on her mortgage? Let Lena feel like I wasn't supporting her family? Every time I caved, it felt less like generosity and more like a silent tax for being their son-in-law. And so, I paid for things quietly. I covered Sophie's late payments. I helped Margaret keep up appearances at church. I let it happen because I wanted to believe that they would do the same for me if the roles were reversed. That's what family does, right? But it was never enough. The more I gave, the more they expected. And I told myself, just one more time. Just one more time and then I'll draw the line. But the line never came. Then Sophie got engaged. I should have seen it coming. Margaret and Lena treated it like a royal announcement, gushing about how Ryan Carter, Sophie's fiancé, was an incredible catch. A young, ambitious chef starting his own restaurant, full of promise. Sophie beamed like a princess, talking about her fairy tale wedding. The dress, the venue, the flowers, the catering. And then, like clockwork, they turned to me. Lena's voice was soft, persuasive. "She only gets married once, Mark." Margaret played the guilt card. "Your father-in-law would have done this for her." Sophie? She didn't even pretend. "I know it's a lot, but I just want it to be perfect." I should have said no. I should have stood my ground. Instead, I did what I had always done. I opened my wallet and shut my mouth. $50,000. That's what it cost to keep the peace. To keep Lena from looking at me like I had failed her. To keep Margaret from treating me like an outsider in my own marriage. To keep Sophie from pouting and throwing a tantrum like a child who didn't get her way. I wired the money without hesitation, without reading the fine print on my own sanity. I told myself it was a one-time thing, that after this, I was done. I had no idea how wrong I was. I should have known it was coming. The moment Sophie announced her engagement, I saw it in Margaret's eyes. That calculated glint, the kind that appears right before she makes a request disguised as a compliment. "Oh, Mark," she sighed, folding her manicured hands in front of her. "You've always been so good to this family." Lena sat beside her mother on the couch, smiling sweetly, as if she wasn't about to drop a financial bombshell on my lap. Sophie, meanwhile, twirled the 2-carat engagement ring on her finger, barely paying attention to the conversation. It was a gorgeous diamond, one that Ryan, her fiancé, definitely couldn't afford on a chef's salary. But I knew better than to ask how she got it. Margaret's voice softened, shifting into her well-practiced tone of motherly persuasion. "You know how much Sophie looks up to you, don't you?" That was the setup. The guilt trip always came next. "She's been dreaming of her wedding since she was a little girl," Lena chimed in, reaching for my hand. "It would mean so much to her if everything was perfect." Perfect. That was the key word. This wasn't about Sophie getting married. This was about a performance. A spectacle meant to impress their friends, their church, their social circles. Still, I played along. "I'm sure Ryan's family will help out," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "His parents must be thrilled." Sophie rolled her eyes, finally tuning in. "They're not exactly wealthy, Mark," she scoffed, as if the idea itself was offensive. "And I can't just have some basic wedding because of that." Basic? I should have walked out right then. Instead, I let them continue. Margaret pulled out a folder. Yes, a folder, filled with cost breakdowns, vendor contacts, and venue estimates. It was color-coded. They had planned this down to the last detail before even asking me. Lena placed it on my lap like it was a gift instead of a financial trap. "It's not that bad," she said quickly, watching my face. I flipped through the pages, feeling my stomach tighten. The venue. The Bellwood Grand Hotel, the most expensive place in town. The dress. Vera Wong. Custom fitted. A price tag in the 5 figures. The catering. The town's most renowned chef, Not Ryan, of course. The decorations, floral arrangements that cost more than a used car. I closed the folder. Sophie, I said slowly, this is extravagant. She pouted. But it's my wedding. I turned to Lena. You really think this is reasonable? She squeezed my hand. It's a once-in-a-lifetime event. And what about Ryan? I pressed. Is he contributing? Margaret sighed dramatically, as if I was being ridiculous. Mark, you know how hard it is to start a restaurant. He's investing in their future. Right. Because I wasn't already investing enough in theirs. And I suppose you're helping out, too? I asked her. Margaret gave me the most insincere smile I had ever seen. You know I would if I could, dear, she said smoothly. But with your father-in-law gone, things have been tight. Things have been tight. This from a woman who had a walk-in closet full of designer shoes and spent thousands on church donations just to maintain her status. I set the folder down. I can't pay for all of this. For the first time, Sophie's sweet facade cracked. But you make 6 figures, she snapped. This is nothing to you. My jaw clenched. That was the moment. The exact moment when I realized that they didn't see my sacrifices as generosity. They saw them as obligations. As if my success automatically meant that my money belonged to them. I took a deep breath. I have other responsibilities. I have my own future to plan for. Margaret tilted her head, as if she was concerned. Your father-in-law always put family first. There it was. The dagger in the heart. They always used Henry's name to manipulate me. To remind me that I was supposed to fill his shoes, to carry their burdens, to never say no. Lena rubbed my arm soothingly. No one's asking you to do everything, she said gently. Just whatever you can. I should have fought harder. I should have told them no and walked out. But instead, I hesitated. That was all they needed. Margaret reached over and squeezed my hand, as if the matter was already settled. We knew you'd come through, Mark, she said warmly. The conversation shifted. Suddenly, they were back to discussing wedding details, ignoring the fact that I had never actually agreed to anything. I left that night feeling drained, but also trapped. Because deep down, I knew what was coming next. The breaking point. The first official request came a week later. Sophie showed up at my apartment with teary eyes, claiming a deposit deadline was approaching for the venue. It's only $15,000, she said, as if it was nothing. I'll pay you back after the wedding. I knew she was lying. The next request came from Margaret about the dress fittings. Then Lena about catering deposits. Every time, it was urgent. Every time, it was the last time. I started dipping into my savings, then into the stocks my father left me. $5,000 turned into $10,000. $10,000 became $30,000. Then, before I knew it, $50,000 was gone. Gone. And not a single thank you. Not a moment of gratitude. Instead, they treated it like a transaction. Like I had paid my dues and that was the end of it. I told myself I had done the right thing. That this was what family did for each other. That it would all be worth it once the wedding was over. But what I didn't realize was that this was just the beginning. That after everything I had sacrificed, after everything I had given, they would still find a way to make me feel like nothing. And it would happen in front of hundreds of people. At the wedding I had paid for. With the woman I had loved standing right beside them. And when the moment came, when I walked into that venue and saw what they had done, I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't fight back. I would simply walk away. And when they called me the next day, I would ignore every single call. I woke up that morning with a sense of dread sitting in my chest like a stone. It should have been excitement. After all, today was the big day. The one I had been financially strong-armed into funding. The one that had drained $50,000 of my hard-earned savings. The one I had sacrificed my own future to make perfect. But I wasn't excited. I was exhausted. I stood by my apartment window, staring at the morning mist rolling over Greenwich Avenue, coffee in hand. It was still early, the city not yet fully awake. Today should have been a celebration. I should have been looking forward to seeing Lena, my wife, dressed beautifully, standing proudly beside her sister. I should have felt like part of the family, like I had done my duty, like all those years of giving and giving and giving had finally earned me my place. But something inside me knew better. There was a meeting I couldn't avoid. An investment analysis with international clients that had been on the books for months. I had planned my schedule down to the minute. The meeting would wrap by 10 a.m., and I'd have just enough time to change, grab a quick bite, and make it to the First Presbyterian Church by 1 p.m. for the ceremony. I had told Lena in advance. I promise I'll be there, I had assured her the night before. I just need to get through this meeting, and I'll head straight to the church. Her lips had tightened. Work is more important than my sister's wedding? I should have argued. I should have reminded her that this wedding wouldn't even be happening without me. But I didn't. I just said, I'll be there. I should have known that wasn't good enough. The meeting that cost me everything. The meeting started smoothly enough. Then, 2 hours in, a client from Shanghai threw me a curveball. "Miss Wilson," he said, addressing me formally, "can you explain your outlook on the Chinese market again? In more detail?" 20 pairs of serious eyes stared at me through the screen. The success of this deal could mean millions in profits for the firm. I checked the clock. 11 a.m. I still had 2 hours. If I wrapped things up quickly, I could still make it. Then the market tanked. Chinese tech stocks plummeted, red arrows flashing across the screen like sirens. I felt my chest tighten. This wasn't just a routine drop. This was chaos. If I left now, I would be abandoning my responsibility to my firm, my team, and my reputation. If I stayed, I would be late to the wedding. What would my father have done? The answer was clear. I stayed. The meeting dragged past noon, then past 1 p.m. By the time we stabilized the market and secured the firm's investments, I was staring at the clock in horror. 2 p.m. I had missed the entire ceremony. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone. 26 missed calls. Most from Lena, a few from Margaret, a couple from Sophie. I didn't even bother listening to the voicemails. I threw on my suit, bolted out of my office, hailed a cab, and begged the driver to hurry. But Friday afternoon traffic in Greenwich had other plans. By the time I arrived at the Hyatt Regency, the wedding reception was already winding down. And the moment I walked through those doors, I realized something terribly, terribly wrong. The venue looked like a dream, exactly as expensive as it had been on paper. Gold chandeliers hung overhead, flickering over tables draped in white linen. The air smelled of fine wine and overpriced floral arrangements. Guests lingered, chatting in hushed tones, finishing their drinks. In the center of it all stood Lena and Margaret, wine glasses in hand, laughing at something Sophie had said. I made my way toward them, but before I could say anything, Margaret turned, her eyes gleaming with amusement. "Finally here," she said, taking a slow sip of wine. "Your seat has already been cleared." LOL. My stomach dropped. Lena smirked and clinked her glass against her mother's. Guests around them chuckled. Not with me, but at me. I swallowed hard, glancing at the tables. My place setting, the one I had paid for, was gone. All that remained was a crumpled place card on the floor with my name on it, stepped on and forgotten. I felt the weight of the moment settle into my bones. This was not a mistake. This was deliberate. Margaret knew I was coming. Lena knew I had done everything to be here. And yet, they had treated me like an afterthought, like someone who didn't matter. The same person who had funded this entire wedding. I could have fought. I could have demanded an apology, called them out for their cruelty, reminded everyone in that room exactly who paid for this lavish event. But I didn't. I simply stood there, silent, still, detached. And then I turned around, and I walked away. The aftermath. A phone that kept ringing. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at my silent phone, waiting for an apology that never came. Instead, the call started again. First Lena, then Margaret, then Sophie. I didn't answer. Then the text messages flooded in. How could you embarrass us like that? You humiliated Sophie on her big day. You've ruined your relationship with this family. You made us look bad at church. Not one of them said, "I'm sorry." Not one of them acknowledged what they had done. By midnight, I had received over 30 missed calls. By morning, 52. And I ignored every single one. Because at that moment, I finally understood. I had never been part of this family. I had only ever been their wallet. And I was finally done paying. I woke up the next morning to the soft glow of daylight streaming through my apartment window. For a brief moment, I forgot what had happened the night before. Then my phone buzzed, and kept buzzing. I turned over and grabbed it off the nightstand. 52 missed calls. Most were from Lena, some from Margaret, a handful from Sophie, a few from unknown numbers, which I could only assume were wedding guests or relatives who had been fed some twisted version of the story. I knew what was waiting for me before I even opened my messages. The first one came from Lena, timestamped 12:03 a.m. I can't believe you just left. Do you even care about this family? Then came Margaret, 12:15 a.m. You humiliated us. People are talking, Mark. You embarrassed your wife. You embarrassed your family. Next was Sophie, 12:27 a.m. After everything we did for you, you couldn't even show up properly? You made me look bad on my wedding day. This was supposed to be about me, not your job. I let out a slow breath, scrolling through the rest. Message after message, all dripping with accusation, but not a single word of acknowledgement. Not one of them said, I'm sorry. Not one of them admitted they had been cruel first. Instead, I had become the villain. For being late, for leaving, for not sitting there like a good, obedient husband while they laughed at me. The longer I stared at those messages, the clearer everything became. This wasn't about me missing the wedding. This was about control. They had expected me to accept the humiliation, to apologize for a crime I hadn't committed, to chase their approval even after they had openly mocked me in front of 100 people. But when I walked away, when I didn't argue, fight, or beg for forgiveness, I had done something they hadn't planned for. I had taken back control, and they hated it. The silence that spoke louder than words. I got up, padded into the kitchen, and made myself a cup of coffee. It was a Saturday, which meant I should have been sitting at brunch with Lena and her family, listening to Margaret boast about how perfect the wedding was and how lucky Sophie was to have a husband like Ryan. Instead, I sat alone at my kitchen counter, phone in hand, deciding whether to engage or keep ignoring them. Then my phone buzzed again. This time, a voicemail from Margaret. I put it on speaker and leaned back in my chair. Mark, dear, I know you're upset, but we really need to talk. People at church are asking questions. We need to get ahead of this before it gets worse. Call me back. I scoffed. This wasn't about fixing things with me. This was about damage control. About her reputation. Another buzz. A voicemail from Lena. Mark, I don't understand why you're acting like this. You're making everything worse. Just answer your phone so we can figure this out. Figure what out? That her mother and sister had intentionally humiliated me? That she had stood there and laughed along with them? That the wedding I paid for had become a stage for my own humiliation? There was nothing to figure out, and I was done playing their game. I set my phone down, let it keep ringing, and took the first sip of my coffee. And for the first time in years, I felt free. The financial wake-up call. By mid-morning, I opened my laptop and logged into my bank account. $50,000. Gone. Just like that. I clicked through the transaction history, looking at the painfully clear breakdown. $15,000. Wedding venue deposit. $10,000. Sophie's dress fittings and alterations. $8,000. Catering prepayment. $7,000. Floral arrangements and event decor. $5,000. Church donations. Margaret's idea, of course. $5,000. Miscellaneous expenses, which probably meant luxury nonsense they didn't tell me about. I closed my laptop. I had spent more on that wedding than most people put down on a house. And for what? So they could mock me in front of a room full of guests? So I could wake up to 52 missed calls and messages blaming me? Something inside me snapped. I grabbed my phone, scrolled to a contact I hadn't dialed in years, and hit call. 3 rings. Then a familiar, steady voice answered. Mark? It's been a while. James Holloway, my father's old attorney. The man who had handled his estate after he passed. The man who had warned me years ago to be careful about mixing family and finances. And the man who was about to help me get my money back. The first step toward freedom. I explained the situation, every detail. The wedding, the money, the way they had treated me, and most importantly, the financial burden they had expected me to shoulder forever. James listened without interruption, then let out a long breath. "Mark, you have every legal right to demand repayment." Those words settled over me like a weight being lifted. I had been trapped in their emotional manipulation for so long. I had forgotten that this was business now. James laid it out for me, step by step. File a certified demand letter requesting repayment. Attach all transaction records and invoices. Give them 30 days to respond before escalating further. It was clean, professional, unemotional. Exactly how I needed to handle this. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" James asked. "This could change your relationship with them forever." I stared out the window, watching Greenwich come to life below me. I thought about the laughter at the wedding, the mocking smiles, the way Lena had stood by and said nothing, and I knew the answer instantly. "James," I said, my voice steady. That relationship ended the moment they cleared my seat. I ended the call, set my phone down, and took another sip of coffee. I had ignored their calls. Now, they were about to hear from me in a way they never expected. I had spent years being the man who said yes. Yes, to helping Sophie with her credit card debt. Yes, to covering Margaret's ever-growing church donations. Yes, to funding an extravagant wedding that wasn't even mine. And what had it gotten me? Mocked, humiliated, discarded. As I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my laptop screen, I realized something I should have known a long time ago. It didn't matter how much I gave. It would never be enough. So, for the first time in 5 years of marriage, I was about to say no. James Holloway, my father's old attorney, had laid out my options clearly. Step 1. Gather every financial record. Step 2. Draft a certified demand letter requesting repayment. Step 3. Give them 30 days to comply before taking legal action. It was a clean process, a professional one, but most importantly, it was on my terms. I pulled up my bank statements and started printing. $15,000, venue deposit. $10,000, Sophie's wedding dress. $8,000, catering. $5,000, floral arrangements. $5,000, church donations. $7,000, miscellaneous family expenses. Each transaction stared back at me like a bad investment I had blindly walked into. I placed them neatly into a folder, then pulled up the document James had sent me. A formal demand letter, cold and clinical. "Dear Mrs. Margaret Whitmore, Mrs. Lena Caldwell, and Mrs. Sophie Carter, this letter serves as a formal request for the repayment of $50,000, which was provided for the wedding of Mrs. Sophie Carter, under the understanding that the funds were to be considered a loan. Per the enclosed financial records, the breakdown of expenses covered is as follows. List of transactions attached. To resolve this matter amicably, I request a structured repayment plan beginning immediately, with a monthly installment of $500. Failure to respond within 30 days will result in further legal action. Regards, Mark Caldwell." I stared at my own name at the bottom of the document. This was who I had become now. Not a provider. Not a silent financier. A man who kept receipts. By the time I drove to the post office, my phone was still buzzing. More missed calls. More texts. But I had long since stopped reading them. The post office was quiet, the kind of place where the air smelled faintly of cardboard and ink. As I handed the certified letter to the clerk, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't a conversation anymore. This was business. "Certified mail?" the clerk asked, looking over the address. "Yes," I said. "I need proof that they received it." She stamped the envelope, nodded, and slipped it into the outgoing tray. Just like that, it was done. The next time they called me, they wouldn't be ignored. They'd be served. That evening, I sat in my apartment, glass of whiskey in hand, waiting for the explosion, and at exactly 8:17 p.m., it came. My phone rang. Lena. I let it go to voicemail. Then another call. Margaret. I let that one ring too. Then Sophie. Then Margaret again. I took another sip of whiskey and waited. Finally, at 8:39 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Lena. "What the hell is this, Mark? A lawyer? A loan?" Then another. "Are you serious? We're family." Family. That word meant nothing to me anymore. I typed out a single response. "Check the documents. You have 30 days. Then I muted my phone and turned off the lights. The next morning, The confrontation? By 10 a.m. the next morning, my doorbell rang. I already knew who it would be before I checked the intercom. Margaret, Lena, Sophie. They stood at my doorstep, dressed as if they were heading to a funeral, which, in a way, they were. The funeral of their free ride. I let them in. Margaret wasted no time. "Mark, what the hell is this?" she snapped, waving the letter in my face. "Are you really suing us?" I didn't blink. "I'm requesting repayment," I said evenly, gesturing to the couch. "Sit down." Lena's face was flushed with anger. "You actually got a lawyer involved? You couldn't just talk to us?" I folded my arms. "Like you talked to me at the wedding?" Sophie crossed her arms, looking offended. "That was just a joke, Mark. You're seriously making a big deal out of nothing." Nothing. $50,000 was nothing. I pulled out the documents from my desk and laid them neatly in front of them. The wedding expenses breakdown, the bank statements, the repayment plan, $500 per month, 14% interest on late payments. Margaret gasped. "Interest?" I looked her dead in the eyes. "If we were strangers, you'd be paying double that." Lena rubbed her temples. "This is insane, Mark. We don't have this kind of money." I shrugged. "Then you should have picked a cheaper wedding." Margaret glared. "People at church are already talking about this. If we don't fix this, our reputation—" I cut her off. "Not my problem." The words felt better than I expected. Sophie scoffed, leaning back against the couch. "You're actually going through with this, aren't you?" I nodded. "The only question is whether you make the payments willingly or I take this further." Silence. Then, finally, Ryan, Sophie's new husband, spoke for the first time. "I'll take responsibility for the repayment," he said quietly. "We'll pay it back." Sophie's head snapped toward him. "Ryan." He ignored her. I gave him a long, measured look. He had been the only one not mocking me at the wedding. And now, he was the only one acting like an adult. "Good," I said. "Then we'll finalize the paperwork tomorrow." I watched them leave, their faces ashen, their pride shattered. As the door clicked shut, I let out a slow breath. This wasn't the end of my battle with them, but it was the beginning of something better. The beginning of a life where I was finally in control. I never thought I'd reach a point where I had to sit my wife and in-laws down like I was a debt collector. But here we were. I arrived at Holloway & Associates, the law firm that had once handled my father's estate, at 9 a.m. sharp. The receptionist greeted me warmly, leading me into a large conference room lined with dark mahogany bookshelves. At the head of the table sat James Holloway, my father's former attorney and the only man I trusted to handle this. He was a no-nonsense type, sharp-eyed and calculated. He glanced over the repayment contract we had drafted the day before and gave a small nod. "They'll push back," he warned. "They'll try to guilt you, manipulate you, maybe even threaten to cut ties. Are you ready for that?" I exhaled slowly. "They already cut me out," I said. "Now it's just paperwork." He slid a stack of documents toward me. "They sign today, or we escalate." I liked how clean it was. No emotion, no arguments, just a transaction. At 9:30 a.m., the doors swung open. Margaret, Lena, Sophie, and Ryan walked in together. Margaret was dressed for battle. A tailored black blazer, pearl earrings, the usual fake air of class. Lena's expression was tight, her arms crossed over her chest like a shield. Sophie looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. Ryan? He looked like a man who had accepted his fate. "Mark," Margaret began, forcing a smile. "This is completely unnecessary." I stayed seated, my fingers drumming lightly against the table. "It's necessary," I said evenly. "Sit down." They did. James slid copies of the repayment contract across the table. "This is the repayment plan," he said in a steady, practiced tone. $500 per month, due on the 5th of each month, with a 14% late fee applied to missed payments. Margaret picked up the contract as if it physically disgusted her. "You're treating us like strangers," she snapped. "This is family, Mark. Family doesn't do this to each other." I leaned forward, keeping my expression blank. "Family doesn't mock you in public," I said. "Family doesn't use you as a blank check. And family doesn't take 50 grand and expect to walk away without consequences." Margaret's jaw tightened. Lena spoke next, her voice sharp with frustration. "We could have talked about this privately," she said. "You didn't have to get lawyers involved." I tilted my head. "Like you talked to me at the wedding?" "Oh wait, you didn't." Her face flushed. She knew I was right. Sophie let out an exaggerated sigh, flipping through the contract like it was a personal attack. "This is going to take years," she muttered. "I don't even know if we can afford this right now." Ryan, who had been silent the whole time, finally spoke. "We'll pay it," he said, voice firm. "We just need some time." Margaret shot him a glare. "You don't speak for this family." He turned to look at her, expression unreadable. "I do now." Sophie stiffened. "Ryan." "No," he said, shaking his head. "This is his money, and he has every right to ask for it back." I almost felt bad for the guy. Almost. Margaret turned back to me, switching tactics. Her face softened, her tone lowered into false warmth. "I know this is about more than money," she said. "You're hurt, and I get it. We should have been more understanding at the wedding. But let's not destroy our family over this." "Destroy our family?" I nearly laughed. "What family?" I asked, watching as her mask slipped for a fraction of a second. "You cut me out the moment I wasn't useful anymore," I continued. "The moment I stopped giving." Lena shifted beside her mother, looking like she wanted to say something. Maybe defend herself, maybe plead. But I didn't care anymore. I wasn't looking for an apology. I was looking for a signature. I reached into my briefcase, pulling out one last document. "If you don't sign today, we proceed legally," I said simply. Margaret's lips thinned, her carefully maintained composure cracking. "You'd really take this to court?" she hissed. I stared at her without blinking. "Try me." The signature that changed everything. The silence in the room was thick, tense. Then Ryan reached for a pen and signed his name first. Sophie gasped, as if he had just betrayed her in front of a firing squad. "Ryan, what the hell?" she hissed. He ignored her, pushing the paper toward me. "My name is on that wedding, too," he said. "It's only fair." For the first time, I actually respected the guy. Margaret's hands were shaking as she signed next. She did it wordlessly, barely looking at me. Then came Lena. She hesitated, staring at the page, her fingers trembling slightly. "Mark," she whispered, "do we have to do this?" I met her gaze, voice calm, steady, final. "We're already doing it." She exhaled shakily, then picked up the pen. I watched as she signed her name, the ink sealing the reality of what she had done. She had chosen them over me, and now she was choosing to pay for it. Sophie was the last holdout. She glared at me, as if this was all my fault, as if I was the one being unreasonable. But there was nothing left to argue. I slid the pen toward her. "Sign," I said. Her eyes flicked to Margaret, then to Lena, then to Ryan, who was already standing up, done with this entire scene. With a dramatic sigh, she grabbed the pen and scrawled her signature onto the contract. It was done. The weight of it settled over the room like a final nail in a coffin. I gathered the papers neatly and placed them in my briefcase. Then, without another word, I stood up. James did the same. "You'll receive your first payment next month," he told them matter-of-factly. "Late fees apply after 48 hours. Margaret looked ready to explode. Lena looked ready to cry. Sophie looked like she wanted to throw the pen at my head. And I felt nothing at all. Without so much as a backward glance, I walked out of the conference room, stepping into the bright morning sun. And for the first time in years, I breathed easily. Because for the first time in years, they weren't my problem anymore. The moment I walked out of Holloway and Associates, I knew there was no going back. I had spent years bending over backwards to keep my wife and her family happy. I had drained my own savings, sacrificed my own time, and ignored the red flags waving in my face. But now, the roles had reversed. I no longer had to chase their approval. I no longer had to pretend to be part of their family. Now, they had to answer to me. And I could tell, from the moment they signed their names on that contract, that they absolutely hated it. A month passed before I heard from any of them. Not through calls or texts. I had muted them weeks ago. Not through awkward family dinners. Those were officially a thing of the past. No, The first sign of life came in the form of a bank notification on the morning of the 5th. Incoming transfer, $500. Sender, Ryan Carter. I stared at the notification for a long time, sipping my coffee, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction settle over me. Sophie's new husband was the only one who had followed through. Not Margaret, who had thrown a fit over the repayment plan. Not Lena, who had accused me of treating them like strangers. Not even Sophie herself, who had fought me every step of the way. Just Ryan, the only person in that family who had shown even a shred of decency. That same night, as I finished up a late work report, my phone buzzed on the desk beside me. For the first time in weeks, I checked the caller ID. Lena. I let it ring. I wasn't interested in hearing more excuses or emotional manipulation. Then, just as I was about to put my phone away, a text popped up. Can we talk? Please. I sighed. Part of me wanted to delete it on sight. But another part, the part that had once loved her, was curious. So, against my better judgment, I picked up the phone and called her back. She answered immediately. Mark, she said, her voice tired, strained. Thanks for calling. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my tone neutral. What do you want, Lena? A pause. Then she sighed. Is this really what you want? For us to be like this? I almost laughed. Like what? Like two people who didn't pretend anymore? Like a husband who finally woke up and saw through the lies? Instead, I simply said, yes. She let out a slow, shaky breath. This isn't us, Mark, she whispered. We were happy once. I closed my eyes, exhaling through my nose. Were we? Or had I simply been too blind to see the truth? Maybe we were, I said. Or maybe I was just the only one trying. She flinched at that. I could hear it in the way she inhaled sharply. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, in a small voice, she asked, Do you think we can fix this? And that's when I knew. She still didn't get it. She still thought this was just a fight we could smooth over. Like I hadn't spent years as their financial safety net. Like they hadn't laughed at me in front of 100 people. Like they hadn't destroyed the very foundation of our marriage with their greed. So, I gave her the only answer I had left. No, Lena, I said softly. We can't. She didn't respond right away. But when she did, her voice cracked just slightly. I see. I hung up before she could say anything else. Because there was nothing left to say. Over the next few months, I started hearing whispers through the grapevine. Margaret, the woman who had once been a pillar of the First Presbyterian Church, the woman who had thrown around money like it grew on trees, had started falling from grace. Her weekly church donations? Gone. Her designer shopping sprees? Non-existent. Her influence at church events? Rapidly fading. Without my financial backing, she was struggling to keep up appearances. And people were noticing. She's been, quieter lately, one of my former church acquaintances mentioned in passing, not as involved in fundraisers. Some people are saying her finances took a hit. I didn't confirm or deny it. I just sipped my drink and let them speculate. Because Margaret's true wealth had never been about money. It had been about perception. And now, that perception was shattering. Sophie's reality check. A year after the wedding, I ran into Sophie at a supermarket. I almost didn't recognize her at first. Gone were the expensive clothes, the perfectly styled hair, the designer handbag swinging off her arm. She looked normal, tired, like someone who had finally been forced to grow up. She saw me too, and for a moment, I thought she might pretend not to. But then she sighed and walked over. Hey, she said, shifting awkwardly. I nodded. Hey. She glanced at my basket, then back at me. Did you get the last of the fresh basil? I looked down. Sure enough, I had grabbed the last pack. I held it out to her. Take it. She blinked, then laughed softly, taking it from my hand. Thanks, she muttered. For a second, I almost walked away. But then she bit her lip and said, Ryan makes the payments, you know? I met her eyes. Yeah, I know. Her shoulders sagged a little. I know I was awful to you, she admitted. And I don't expect you to forgive me, but I just wanted to say it. I studied her for a long moment. Then I simply nodded. Noted. And that was it. No dramatic apologies. No attempts to rewrite history, just acknowledgement. And honestly, that was enough. The man I had become. 3 years after the wedding, my life looked completely different. I had become the youngest partner at Whitman and Carter, my firm recognizing the work ethic I had poured into every deal. I had joined a mentorship program, helping young professionals navigate their own financial independence. And best of all, I had no more financial deadweight. No Lena, no Margaret, no Sophie. I had rebuilt my life on my own terms, and I had zero regrets. As I stood by my apartment window, sipping a glass of Chardonnay, I watched the streetlights flicker below. For the first time in years, I felt at peace, because I had finally learned the most valuable lesson of all. Not every family deserves your loyalty, and some debts aren't just about money. I used to think that family was forever, that no matter what happened, no matter how many mistakes were made, blood ties meant loyalty, forgiveness, and unconditional support. But life had taught me otherwise. Family isn't about genetics or last names. It's about respect. It's about reciprocity. And it's about knowing when to walk away. It had been 3 years since I made that decision. 3 years since I mailed that legal demand letter. Since I stopped playing the role of their financial safety net. Since I stopped chasing the approval of people who had never truly valued me. Now, I was standing at my father's grave, looking down at the headstone that had once felt like a painful reminder of everything I lost. But today, for the first time, I didn't feel the usual weight of grief. I felt peace. I placed a bouquet of white lilies at the base of the stone, exhaling as the spring breeze rustled the leaves above me. "Hey, Dad," I murmured. "I think you'd be proud of me now." I had spent years trying to live up to an expectation that was never real. They had told me, over and over, "Your father would have done this for us." But my father wasn't a fool. He wasn't a man who let others walk all over him. And I finally understood that. I wasn't betraying his legacy. I was honoring it by choosing self-respect over blind obligation. A career, a purpose, a future. The old version of me, the man who had drained his savings to fund a wedding he wasn't even respected at, was long gone. Now, I had a career that I had built on my own terms. After the firm had seen how I handled the high-risk international market crash, I had been promoted to senior partner at Whitman and Carter, the youngest partner in the firm's history. I had made the 40 under 40 list in a prominent financial magazine. My expertise was being sought out by investors, CEOs, and rising entrepreneurs. But success, I had realized, wasn't just about money or recognition. It was about having control over your life. And that was something Lena's family had tried to take from me. The monthly transaction that meant nothing. Every month, on the 5th, my phone still lit up with a notification. Incoming transfer, $500. Sender, Ryan Carter. At first, I had expected it to be an empty promise, a way to pacify me before they tried to back out of the agreement. But to my mild surprise, Ryan had never missed a payment. He was a man of his word, even if the rest of them weren't. But that monthly transfer? I didn't celebrate it. I didn't feel satisfied by it. I simply logged it into my records like any other financial transaction and moved on. Because that's all it was now. Business. They had treated me like a walking ATM for years. Now, they were repaying a debt. It wasn't personal. It wasn't emotional. It was just balance being restored. I heard through the grapevine that Margaret had finally lost her place in the First Presbyterian Church's elite social circle. Without my financial support, her donations dwindled. Without the constant stream of luxury expenses, her status faded. She was no longer the powerful widow maintaining her late husband's legacy. She was just another aging woman struggling to keep up with an image she could no longer afford. I imagined it must have eaten her alive, watching as the people who once flocked to her brunches and admired her extravagant lifestyle now treated her as just another former socialite past her prime. But I didn't care anymore. She had built her entire identity on appearances, and when those appearances shattered, she had nothing left. That was her burden to bear. Sophie. The reality check she never wanted. Sophie's lavish lifestyle had crumbled just as quickly. Ryan's restaurant had shut down within a year. He had taken a job at a small pizzeria in New Haven, trying to make ends meet. And Sophie? She had gone from wearing designer brands to shopping clearance racks. She had spent her entire life living beyond her means, believing that as long as she could charm, manipulate, or guilt someone into paying, the money would always be there. But now, she was learning what it felt like to budget for the first time. And she hated it. I ran into her once, at a grocery store, months after everything had settled. She had looked at me with awkward discomfort, shifting uncomfortably as if debating whether to acknowledge me or not. In the end, she muttered a brief, quiet apology, though it had taken years for her to get there. But by then, I didn't need it anymore, because I had moved on. The final closure with Lena. Lena had been the hardest to forget. Even after everything, the wedding humiliation, the betrayal, the financial manipulation, there had been a time when I had loved her, and for a while, that love had made it difficult to let go completely. But the last conversation we ever had was short, simple, and final. One night, months after we had gone our separate ways, she sent me one last message. "I just wanted to say that I hope you're happy. I hope you don't hate me." I stared at the words on the screen for a long time, and then I typed back my final response. "I don't hate you. I just finally learned to value myself." Then I deleted her number. And just like that, she became nothing more than a chapter one had closed for good. A future that was finally mine. I had rebuilt my life from the ground up. I had reclaimed my financial independence. I had learned the power of saying no. And now, I had a career I loved, new friendships I trusted, and a future I controlled. As I stood in my apartment, sipping a glass of Chardonnay, looking out at the twinkling city lights, I smiled to myself. Because for the first time in years, I was truly free. No debts, financial or emotional. No regrets. And no more people who only saw me as a wallet, rather than a man. Life didn't always go the way I planned. But I had finally learned the most valuable lesson of all. You don't owe anyone your loyalty just because they share your last name. And some investments are better left unmade.